All right, sorry about that. Just had a bit of a technical glitch there. It's great to
sorry about that. Just had a bit of a technical glitch there.
I have to kill. There we go. Sorry, I had the YouTube on as well. So, anyways, nice to see everyone. Wow, already got 12 people. That's fantastic. I have a feeling this is going to be a much better slot. I've been usually doing the live streams during the day, and so this maybe it's a better slot. I'm actually going to look at 5 minutes later than I'm doing it right now. That's funny. I had 12 people, went down to 8. Maybe my hair is not good enough today. I'm just kidding. But I think I'm going to do 5:30 p.m. West Coast time, 8:30 p.m. East Coast time, as far as the U.S. goes, of course. And so there is quite a lot of stuff buzzing out there in the ether. But before I jump into that, I just want to say, if you are interested in getting a Vedic astrology reading from me, either natal or Navamsa, this is there's a 1 week worth left of slots, and I think I only have actually 2 more readings that I'm going to be doing this year. I will be doing readings into 2024. I'm just not sure how far into 2024. So of course you can book if you want to do like a last minute Christmas gift or something like that. You can book in December, but it will be for January, just so you know. So if you're interested in getting a natal chart reading to learn about your karmas under 40, then you'll want to do that right away if you want it this year, or an Navamsa reading if you're over 40 like me, just to see that awesome sequel that you have in your life to the first half, which can oftentimes be way, way better. Like for me, my natal chart sucks, and that was definitely my experience, and then my Navamsa is pretty good. So yeah, if you're interested in that, just go to whitelotusoflight.com consultations and book a reading, as there's only, I think actually I only have 2 more left for 2023 because I am taking the final week from Christmas on. I am taking that off. All right, so tonight's going to be, I'm going to try and focus mostly on Q&A and actually have that be a bigger portion of the show, assuming that we have enough participation. But there's a lot going on, and just some things that I've sort of talked about in the past are starting to actually come to fruition now. And one of the things is that 2020 was the last year that the Luciferians were working hand in glove with the Malakans. Now, it doesn't mean that there's no crossover anymore, or there's no Luciferians that are still working for the Malakans. But as a general rule, both the spirit Lucifer himself parted ways with the spirit Moloch, but also at the level of the administration of the planet, that level of people, black nobility, etc., they've parted ways. Now, what that looks like is that you may have noticed that ever since the gigantic psyop of 2020, that all the psyops have looked kind of like retreads, right? They've just been the same tired thing they've done before with no nuance or subtlety. Whereas if you look at the psyops that they were doing, say during the Obama and Bush administrations, they were very fresh, they were very sophisticated. They had that quality of hitting multiple goals with a single, where they would hit multiple birds with a single stone kind of thing. But that has really gone away with the parting of the ways that's happened as the Luciferians begin to position themselves to take over. Now, the Luciferians are still heavily embedded in all these Molochian power structures. But what they're doing is they're slow rolling things. They're not working together in concerted effort. They're picking and choosing where they work with the Molochians in order to achieve their goals that overlap with the Molochian goals. For example, digital ID. Digital ID is something that both groups seem to want, and it makes a lot of sense that the Molochians want it because they just want total top-down control. You never have to think too much about what the Molochians want because it's always the same. Genocide, democide, depopulation, total enslavement of humanity, Orwell's boot, endlessly stomping in the face. Not very interesting or sophisticated at all. Whereas the Luciferians want a robust global civilization that has a fairly high population, although they do want mostly very competent people. One of the things that I talk about, a major difference between the Molochians and Luciferians in worldview, that can sometimes look the same to the outside observers. The Molochians they're just democidal. They just want to murder. They just want to kill as many people as possible because they believe if there's less people, people are easier to control. By contrast, the Luciferians are eugenical. And when I say eugenics, eugenics is often conflated with depopulation. Now, it's often, there's a lot of overlap between those two. The difference is that the goal of the depopulation of the Molochians is, I mean, the means is the ends, right? They just want to kill. There's not really any further thought to it. They're psychopaths. The Luciferians want to cull the herd of the undesirables, right? They believe in eugenics in the sense of the way it was originally pitched back in the early 20th century, which was much like breeding of horses. You want to breed for the best traits and get rid of the undesirable traits, perhaps by culling the herd. So there's certain goals, you know, for example, the whole 2020 PSYOPs was a mix of the Molochians trying to commit a vast democide and the Luciferians trying to blunt that by having a more eugenical approach. Now, based on Gnosis, based on what the angels have said, the Luciferians were not able to protect as many people as they had hoped and to retain as many sort of high IQ, high talent, favorable genetics people as they had originally intended, and that the Molochians shotgun, just kill them all kind of thing, it didn't completely carry the day, but it was a mixed bag. That's what I've been told. And that's why you see in some places why there were the kinds of pokies that had an immediate deadly effect or very quickly, right, within a matter of months, right? And then other places you seem to see absolutely no consequences from people taking the pokey. And that's because in those areas, which I will note are mostly on the coastal areas of the United States, which does happen to be, and I do not mean any offense to anyone who doesn't live on either of the coasts, but the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of economic activity and population, and therefore because of the economic part of things, the vast majority of the sort of higher IQ, higher talent people are on the coast. And thus the Luciferians wanted to protect the coast, and they were able to talk the Molochians into this because, of course, those are Democrat strongholds. Now, I certainly do not contend that these are superior people in any way. I find the highest and best and principle that we should be striving for is people who are ethically, morally, and spiritually advanced. And so I would have, you know, not that I would have done the Luciferian stuff, but if I had had that mindset, I would have had it be based on a very different metric. But the Luciferians are that mix of materialist and spiritual, and they are pragmatic and they're ruthless, right? They're quite nasty. They are not a good group at all. And that's one of the things that I think is lost sometimes when I talk about these power dynamics, is that you have to understand both of these groups are utterly ruthless. Both of these groups, the Luciferians and Molochians, are not afraid to commit a democide or mass killing. It's just that they have a very different goals in mind. The Luciferians have the long-term goal of improving the human stock, improving the human material condition, and getting us off the planet. You'll notice that, like, one of the Luciferians I talk about all the time on the show, Elon Musk, is utterly obsessed with getting us to Mars and getting us out into space. And really, Mars, from a logistics point of view, Mars is the gateway to the outer planets. And so that is one of their primary goals, is getting out there into space. And you can't do that with just a tiny, tiny, tiny population and a bunch of robots and AI. You know, the Molochians want this future where they sit there and they're like the kings of the world, and they have all the resources they want, and they have a handful of human sex slaves, and everything else is done by AI and robots. Now, the Luciferians also want AI and robots and support that. That's another thing that confuses people. The Luciferians are okay with transhumanism in the sense of people who want to augment themselves with cybernetics. That's in contrast to, it looks the same initially, right? They both are transhumanist and into cyborgs, but one group wants cybernetic mystery zombies that are total slaves. You know, imagine that scene in The Matrix where there's all those pods with electricity, but instead of electricity, it's harvesting spiritual energy. Well, that's what the Molochians' goal is with this great reset, putting people in pods and the bug paste and the brain chip, right? Contrast that with more of the cyberpunk, I forget what year it is, 2077, I think it is, but the cyberpunk kind of future where there's actually a great deal of, in that scenario, which is predictive programming for the Luciferian age in a lot of ways, in that cyberpunk 2077 milieu, they have a lot of free will. There's a very heavily stratified society based on meritocracy, right? But also ruthlessness. And there's a cybernetic humans are all over the place in cyberpunk 2077. But those humans are free. They're free to choose whether they get cybernetics or not. It's kind of hard not to in that scenario just because it gives you a big competitive advantage, but it's not forced upon them with a goal of total enslavement. It's meant to build up society with a goal, and that goal is, the Luciferians' primary goal is to get us spacefaring, to first colonize the solar system, and then to move throughout the galaxy. What the angels and Lord Thoth and Krishna, some of the Hindu pantheon that I've obtained gnosis for what it's worth, have said, is that there is something very special about humans compared to other intelligent species, even ones that are very genetically similar to us that are off planet. And that is that there's something about Earth to where it's incredibly spiritually potent. That's part of the reason that this planet is geographically, if you will, it's not geographic. I don't know what the word is for geographic and galaxy graphic. I don't know. But part of the function of being on the outer end of the outer spiral arm is that we are we're meant to be kept, not really necessarily in quarantine, although that is something that is part of things, but that we were meant to develop without interference from these other species, in part because part of our destiny as a species is we're profoundly spiritually powerful beings, far more so than we realize. And so Lucifer looks at humans on Earth as being very important to his plans of galactic conquest. Lucifer is off planet already. There's a number of other deities that are off planet. When I say they're off planet, they would be conceived of very differently on different planets. I'm going to actually get into that later down the line of why you have to be careful transferring, someone asked, I guess I can just say it now because it's kind of like a perfect spot to drop it in with a bigger point I want to make. Someone asked, is Enki Lucifer and Enlil is Moloch? So the short, sloppy answer is yes. The more in-depth answer is no, but kind of. And what I mean by that is that there's certain attributes of Enki and Lucifer that are very similar. And in a certain sense, it's true in that it's the perception of that being through that cultural lens. But there's some different qualities. And there's a reason why I always use the sort of Judeo-Christian archetypes of Moloch, Lucifer, and the Most High, because I'm trying to speak to an audience that, based on what the angels have told me, not everyone, but a big chunk of people who are going to sort of survive this bottleneck that is about to occur and will be Most High worshipers, that's actually the group I'm most interested in. I know I spend all my time talking about the Luciferians and Molochians, but I'm actually going to touch on this episode later, Golden Age Enclaves. But that is the group that I'm most interested in, because one of the roles that I and others will perform is this creation of these Golden Age Enclaves, these places where people who are in alignment with Most High and the Most High energy will be allowed to thrive in the coming Luciferian age. So what I have been told is that because of this quality of spiritual potency, Lucifer wants to leverage that and take us off this planet and use that basically to help in his conquest of the entire galaxy. That's his goal. This guy dreams pretty big, right? So you'll notice one of the qualities that you can find in a lot of the Luciferians is this obsession with space, right? NASA is a very it's one of those organizations that has many different factions in it, and it's doing lots of different stuff. But you could say that NASA and the secret space program especially are both primarily Luciferian groups. And the people who work on this and fund it, like Musk, are mostly part of that Luciferian. Now, from a strategic point of view, the Molochians understand the importance of space. They get that. They don't really care about getting off the planet. Their interest in space is to create a more complete and total prison on Earth, and maybe some floating prison colonies like Bezos wants, where they can have their own little floating kingdom where they can just be absolute despots, much the same way that the king of, I'm trying to think of what the name of that country was. There was the Belgian king who was in Congo. That same kind of King Leopold, like just complete insanity, like it's your own little kingdom and you can just be as bestial as you want. Some of the Malakians are interested in space, it seems, for that reason. Bezos talked about that. But they don't have this sort of grand vision the way the Luciferians do. But they were talked into going out into space for the weaponization of space, for satellites, for ways like this, the space fence, the so-called space fence that I think it's Linda Moulton Howe, I believe that's who talks about it a lot, where they want to just enclose the entirety of the planet and make it a prison planet, right? And I mean, it's not a mistake that Alex Jones, who is, in my opinion, a Luciferian intelligence operative, uses that term prison planet. That's his old name for his website before it became InfoWars. It was Prison Planet. And both of those are revelation of the method, in the sense that in both cases, he's talking about the end goal of the Molochians is to make the Earth a total, complete, unrelenting, forever prison. That's what they want. They want to freeze everything in the Kali Yuga forever. That's what they want. Because they don't want there to be any change. They don't want there to be any evolution. They want to freeze things. Lucifer is a very evolutionary force by his very nature, and so he does want evolution. And that's one of the areas that the Molochians and Luciferians come to a head, is things like technological advancement. So what was I going to say? Yeah, so I was talking about retreads earlier, so I'm tracing it back to that. They're trying to roll out C19 again. It's just incredible. They're trying to, like, they can't even come up with, remember when they came with monkeypox? Remember when they came with monkeypox? And I swear to God, that was the Luciferians trolling the Molochians and tricking them into putting it out there, the same way that they trolled the Molochians by whispering in Klaus Schwab's ear, "Tell them to eat the bugs, Klaus." Oh, yeah. Oh, that's very humiliating. That gets my micro penis quite hard, actually. Yeah. So, you know, like, I swear it was trolling the monkeypox thing. Like, I get that it's an actual name of the actual disease, but of all the different, you know, you put your hand in the hat of different communicable diseases that you can make a pandemic, you pull out monkeypox, don't you just immediately throw that away and look for something with a scarier name, right? I mean, it just doesn't even scare, like maybe ape pox, right? Or like ape shit pox, right? Like the gorilla going gorilla pox, right? Now that's a little scary, right? Mandrill pox, something, right? But monkeypox, like, monkeys sound harmless and cute. Like, what were they thinking? So that was a total dud. And now they're like, they're not even creative enough to come up with the whatever the equivalent of non-scary monkeypox would be. And they're literally trying to roll out C19 again. And you see it in Austria in particular. And they're saying, oh, we looked in the sewers and we checked, and there's like so much of this new variant and blah, blah, blah. And I think they were going to try and go with a different form of respiratory disease. And that's why they were like having those rumblings of a pneumonia in China, right? But they just eventually said, golly, let's just try the same thing again. Why not? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, can't get fooled again. Like, they didn't even listen to the wisdom of George W. Bush and realize can't get fooled again, right? Like, people aren't going to buy it this time. They're really not. Yeah, people are getting sick. Yeah, I think they're probably pulling 12 monkeys and probably spraying fresh out of the CRISPR virus. There's now evidence from gene sequencing that Omicron was also lab created, and it wasn't actually a natural in the wild evolution, right? It wasn't a natural in the wild variant, I guess. It was lab created, it seems. So, you know, they're wanting to run out C-19 again, and they're thinking that they can maybe do a shutdown again, and doubtless they'll want to do mail-in ballots again, right? They're just, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Black Lives Matters riots again. And it's not going to work. People have seen this movie, right? And you see these uncreative retreads everywhere the Molochian strongholds are. Just even 15 years ago, Hollywood was putting out pretty consistently, not the blockbusters, but pretty consistently, they were putting out quite a lot of really new material. I mean, back 15 years ago, I don't think the first Marvel comic book movie had come out. I mean, maybe X-Men, but not like these, you know, things like the Avengers or whatever, right? The like super Marvel University things, right? That was more than, where it's crossover between more than one group of heroes. They hadn't put those out yet, and so that was new and fresh when it first came out. And now they have Captain Marvel and the Marvels, right? Just complete, like, the greatest, arguably some people are saying it's the greatest flop of all time. It's because there's been this huge brain drain away from the left in Hollywood and towards places like, I don't like Ben Shapiro, like, at all. I really do not like Ben Shapiro. I tend to think that he is I don't know. He talks like he's a Luciferian, but he acts like he's a Malakan, and so I don't really like him. His sister's hot, I'll say that, but I don't like him, and she's, I'm sure, a nasty person too, most likely, if she's anything like her brother. But he really doesn't have much to positive to offer. But Daily Wire, which does have a ton of Luciferians in it, in particular, Candace Owens is one of the big torchbearers for the Luciferian effort and sort of like libertarianism in general, which libertarianism is sort of like the root philosophy, really, in a lot of ways, of the Luciferians. They have actually good content coming out on their channel, even though despite they have you know, 1/1000th, 1/10,000th of the budget that Hollywood does. A lot of their stuff is uncreative in the sense of it's a reaction to Hollywood, but it's creative in the sense that it's actually like, you know, it's striking on cultural chords that people like, or it's funny. Like there's this new movie that they just had come out called Lady Ballers that's all about an entire team of like men who aren't super athletic who go on to dominate women's basketball just by claiming that they're women. And I mean, that's funny. And that movie kind of needed to be made. And it's a shot across the bow for this Molochian ESG, DEI, CEI control matrix that BlackRock tried to put in place that has completely exploded over the past year, right? Like if you just think about the last year, like a year ago, Disney was still reasonably popular. People were getting sick of it. They were getting tired of the woke stuff, but it's dropped off a cliff by comparison now. And they're getting panned by, you know, like South Park did a whole episode, Enter the Pandaverse, where they just mocked it. People keep thinking it's pandering. It's not. It's CEI, DEI, and ESG. So that's, let's see, what is it? So it's diversity, equity, inclusion. And I forget what the CEI stands for, but it's basically the same thing. And then ESG is environmental and sustainability goals. And these are all bullshit Molochian control metrics that are encoded to appear to be helpful to minorities or the environment or whatever, but that's not what it's about at all. It's about controlling where funding is going. And so BlackRock, you know, totally a Molochian for days, although at the very center of BlackRock is an extremely Luciferian thing, which is the Aladdin artificial intelligence that manages their portfolio that was no doubt coded by Luciferians, just like the entire blockchain system and almost all AI. And the thing is, if you remember that movie Jurassic Park, there was that fat guy, Dennis Nedry, who was in there and he wasn't getting paid enough, right? And that's kind of interesting parallel. He wasn't getting paid enough, so he's going to steal all the embryos of the different dinosaurs and take it out in that little shaving container, right? What does he do? He types in white rabbit object, and it causes their entire grid to drop. And nobody knew about it because as Samuel Jackson's character is trying to solve what happened, says, well, I'm going to find it. I just have to go through a few million lines of code. So you have right at the center of BlackRock, you have this Aladdin AI system, which AI, I think, is very likely. Technology allows for spirits to push through into this world. And so AI is super ripe for spirit takeover, for takeover by a spirit. It's perfect for it, really. And so I think you're going to see Lucifer himself operate through a lot of this AI that's out there, which means that putting AI at the center, like the Molochians are doing, is just phenomenally stupid. It's like holding someone hostage and then giving them the gun because to defend the room you're in, you're going to give your own hostage the gun. Like, it's so incredibly stupid. But again, these Molochians aren't very stupid, and so you'll see how there's this retread phenomenon of that the Molochians keep going back to the same well. So expect something akin to Black Lives Matter. It'll probably be immigrant protests, so it'll probably be slightly different. But what are they going to say? Oh, anyone who opposes this is racist. Racism, racism, racism. Because that's all they got. There was a time when that was fresh and sophisticated, back when the Luciferians were working with them. But everything they've done, especially the last 3 years, has gotten dumber and dumber and dumber and more predictable. And so moving on to the next thing, tip of the hat to viewer and friend Brent. I saw an excerpt of an interview with Whitney Webb about Argentina and Javier Milei winning. Now, I really like Whitney Webb. Let me rephrase. Whitney Webb, I have a tremendous amount of respect for her. She is a fantastic researcher, and she is an amazing intellectual. I don't know, but I suspect that she's an atheist. And regardless of why it is, she tends to see the world in very black and white terms, it seems to me, as an outside observer. And she can't seem to see any nuance or difference between these various different elite actors. Now, obviously, this is a big issue, and that's why I constantly harp on this Luciferian versus Molochian thing. With that caveat about my feelings on Whitney Webb, both that I think she's a fantastic researcher, but also that I think her conclusions are incorrect because she doesn't understand the subtleties, between these groups. And I mean, you can even explain it to people like this. It's 1948. Would you rather live under Truman, who was evil and nuked Japan twice, right, and did a lot of evil things, or would you rather live in Russia under Stalin? And if you can't see a difference between those two, I don't know what to tell you. And yet people make that kind of comparison that once you reach a Truman level of evil, you're exactly the same as Stalin, which is fucking insane and not true. It's just not true. And it shows actually kind of an infantilization of believing in Disney style, Star Wars, really clear good and really clear evil. The bad guy's going to dress all in black. He's going to have a respirator, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes that's true. Look at Klaus Schwab, right? But there is one character in Star Wars that or a couple characters that are kind of in that in-between state, right? And that's Han Solo and Lando Calrissian. They're both kind of criminals, right? And they're both very intelligent, and they're both crafty, and they're both tricksters, and they both don't want to go along with this insane top-down control empire, and they kind of end up fighting against it. They end up joining forces with the more Most High. Now, in the Star Wars movies, the Most High type aligned group is the victorious group, which unfortunately is not what's happening here. It would be more like if Lando Calrissian and Han Solo, everyone was like them, just a bunch of very sophisticated criminals and grifters and whatever who, wanted to have some kind of empire or whatever. So I mean, the analogy falls down a bit, which goes back to that thing I was saying earlier about Enki and Enlil. You got to be careful when you're trying to say Lucifer is the same as this is the same as this, but it gives you kind of a sense. So Whitney Webb to me seems trapped in that paradigm of it's either black or it's white. It's very clearly evil or very clearly good, and there's no in between. And I just don't agree with that. History doesn't bear that out. I mean, there's some places that have been just so loathsomely evil that it's almost impossible to comprehend. The difference between a very stark classic example is Imperial Britain versus Revolutionary War United States, which it doesn't really get any more Luciferian than the Revolutionary War. They didn't want to be taxed unfairly. They didn't want to be controlled. But then they kept the Molochian institution of slavery, right? They were willing to break a few eggs to make an omelet, and they wanted to install a fairly ruthless landowner-based capitalism based on elitism, right? But they weren't nearly as tyrannical as we're going to have soldiers in your fucking house, and we're going to tax tea at a rate that is like prohibitive to where most people won't even be able to afford it, right? We're going to have lower taxes and more people have access to it, but you better work hard and you better be a badass and you better earn it, right? So Whitney Webb pointed out in this interview, talking about Argentina, that there's a book apparently called The Jewish State by Theodore Herzl. And again, hat tip to Brent for this. He tipped me off with this today. I got a little annoyed with Whitney Webb's endless blackmail. That's what, real quick, back to Whitney Webb. What frustrates me about Whitney Webb and researchers like her, and there's a number of them out there, people I deeply respect, is that when you don't see this nuance that I talk about incessantly on this channel, Luciferians versus Molochians, you almost inevitably blackpill people by giving them true information, right? So I'm about to give you some true information here that if you look at it a certain way, will just make you conclude that, oh no, the bad guys have won again. And that was Whitney Webb's conclusion here. But I disagree. That's where she's wrong. A lesser evil one here. So she said that in the book, The Jewish State by Theodore Herzl, who apparently is the creator of Zionism. I'm not 100% on that particular factoid. If he's not back in the 1800s, then that seems doubtful to me that that's the case, because Zionism has certainly existed since at least the 1800s I'm aware of. But regardless, he wrote this book called The Jewish State, and in that he proposed that Israel be either in Palestine or it be in Argentina, specifically Patagonia, which would have been a vastly better choice, by the way, what with the, unless there's some giants that are still left down there from the explorer era, it's reasonably uninhabited Patagonia. You could easily have like all of modern state of Israel dropped into Patagonia and probably not even have to move any indigenous people, or if you did, it'd be pretty small. Certainly nothing like the Palestinian situation. So Javier Milei wants to get rid of Argentine debt, and his solution to that, right, because he wants to unleash the economic engine of Argentina, his solution to that is to give a lot of Argentine resources and land to people who own the debt. And some of the people who own the debt are people like, and I haven't been able to verify this. I'm going to take Whitney Webb's word on this. And any bad guys watching, please go after Whitney Webb, not me. I'm just repeating what she said. So I'm not the source on this. This one, I don't like to talk about specific modern individuals who are puppet masters because they're not very nice to people when they're outed. So this guy, I guess, named Michael Steinhardt is a dual citizen. And he's an Argentine and Israeli dual citizen, and he's a Zionist, and he's one of Milei's biggest backers. And he, in particular, wants to seize up land for debt around the Argentine debt that they've had, a debt crisis for like 22 years since the economy collapsed and the IMF stepped in and all that stuff. And he wants, in particular, to get a lot of this land in Patagonia. And he's a Zionist, and he's apparently from a strain of Zionism that sort of wants to replace Judaism, the religion, with a religion of Zionism, of that we've moved beyond those previous stages and now we just need a land for our people, and that it would be divorced and disconnected to a large degree from the historical religious background. At least this is what Whitney Webb said. I haven't heard this before. It's very interesting to me. I want to get to another little point about Argentina here in a second, which I will, but I want to point out that Winston Churchill said something very interesting. He said that there was a battle for the soul of the Jewish people between Zionists on the one hand and communists on the other. I really have been wrestling with that quote and seeing if that feels right, and then if it feels connected at all to this conflict between the Luciferian and Malakan. If it is connected, it would seem pretty clear to me that communism is obviously Malakan, without question. It checks all the boxes. Atheist, check. Destruction of God, check, right? neutering the advancement of humanity, right? Like really keeping people down, total top-down control, right? Basically, just a new system of slavery with just a little thin veneer of, oh, the workers own everything, right? I don't know how I feel about the second part of the equation of that Zionism connects to the Luciferian. If you want to run with that, that's curious, because you will notice that Trump, Millet, Maloney, and Geert Wilders are all staunch Zionists and support Zionism to the nth degree. There is a huge conflict. In many ways, you could say that Israel is the center fulcrum of this conflict between the Luciferians and the Molochians. The reason for that is both the Luciferians and Malakians have a lot invested in revelations and some of the other biblical prophecy. They both need to fulfill certain aspects of that because of their own much darker prophecies around this. And so they need to have the buy-in and the spiritual attention of Christians and Jews and Muslims, because all three of the Abrahamic faiths would bring their attention to Israel as things worsen there, especially if like a regional war broke out and Israel is at the center, or if ever they were to destroy the Dome of the Rock and try and rebuild the third temple. Any of those things would cause all the eyes of all the Abrahamic people around the world to be drawn there. And much like Revelation of the Method, where they implant the magical spell through a conscious ritual, they would be doing a similar thing there, right? With the desire to bring about an incarnation or avatar of Satan or Moloch on the Molochian side to try and lock things down on Earth permanently, an avatar of the lower aspect of Saturn, or a more antichrist, sophisticated, manipulative figure that would be more in line with the Luciferian sort of agenda. So circling back to Argentina, not only are they trying to get land for debt around Patagonia, but apparently Argentina has one of the biggest claims to land, and in particular mining rights in Antarctica. Now, currently nobody can mine Antarctica. It's part of the international treaty. But you can do things like my understanding is you can do not mining, but you can do things like assaying, right? And you can do that under, it's scientific research. Now, I think that that's a cover story. This whole idea of Zionism in Patagonia and Israel 2.0 in Patagonia, sure, it could happen. It doesn't feel right to me. I think more likely was that they were trying to do this in Ukraine, which is the historical home of the Khazarian people, which a lot, but not all, Ashkenazi Jews can be traced to that. Also to Italians, but this is a contentious subject, but it seems to me that it's a combination of people in the Roman Empire who converted around the time of Spartacus or thereabouts, and then the waves of emigres from Khazaria. But regardless, I know, and I wish I could find this, and if any viewer can find this, fantastic. There's a Zionist. He's a hard right Zionist scholar, but he's fairly devout, and he's super adamant that he says, like, one of the main things facing the Jewish people is we've got to out the synagogue of Satan, and he identifies them specifically as Sabbatian Frankists, and I largely agree with him on that. Sabbati Levi was a guy who claimed to be the Messiah. He eventually converted to Islam, and then that created a bunch of crypto-Jewish people who were Sabbatian Frankists, who became, among other groups, the royal house of the kingdom of Saud, the house of Saud in Saudi Arabia. They're actually from this Sabbatian Frankist, Sabbati Levi, and his forced conversion. Their line traces to his followers, which is fascinating because his followers were pedos, among other things. They basically believed, the Sabbatian Frankists, they were a very dark form of Gnosticism. And they said that, the God of the Bible in the Old Testament, that's a false God, and the real God is hidden beyond that. And the only way you can access that real God, right, which is clearly Moloch they're referring to, is by inverting everything in the Torah, right? So inverting the 10 Commandments. So they would, in their more benign form, they'd have orgies, right? Elite people orgies, the eyes wide shut stuff. In their darker form, they would do stuff like Epstein harm of children. And I believe that this is roughly around the time when the whole blood libel thing started to rise, to where regular, normal, totally decent, good people who are Jewish would be accused of this blood libel, right? It wasn't Jewish people. It was this total aberration that has nothing to do with Judaism, known as Sabbatian Frankism, where they were indeed doing that, adrenochrome, right? So I think that that those Sabbatian Frankists have infected and are really the cover for Moloch worship. That is what this Zionist scholar was pointing to and was saying that needed to be called out. I agree with him. He said that in the late 1990s, the wealthy people who were behind Israel were this close to moving Israel to Ukraine, that they were this close to basically purchasing generally the area of the Donbass and basically where historical Khazaria was, so east of Kiev, basically, and in between the Caspian and Black Seas and down to the Caucasus Mountains, that they wanted to buy that, and that Russia was working with Ukraine and with, I think it's Kazakhstan is the other country that there would have been. It would have been out of 3 countries, but that they were going to buy that land and basically move Israel there, much the way this guy is proposing to move Israel to Patagonia. And what caused that deal to fall apart was they found the Caspian Sea oil and gas reserves, which in the early 2000s were believed to be absolutely beyond enormous. They've since dialed that back quite a bit, but there's still quite large reserves, and that's what caused that to fall apart. So while it's possible that they're looking to make sort of a backup Israel and Patagonia, I don't buy that. What I think it's something deeper, and I think it relates to Antarctica. Antarctica, there's a few different reasons that they might be interested in that. There's been persistent rumors for decades of 3 separate things. One, the Shangri-La under the ice, that I forget, some submarine captain said that they had built a Shangri-La under the ice someplace far away for the Fuhrer. So the infamous Nazi Antarctica base that some people say is what happened with Operation High Jump when Admiral Byrd went down there, and they claimed that all these flying saucers came up and wiped out the fleet, or it slapped it pretty hard, so they had to retreat, which Admiral Byrd did say something that seemed to back that up to some degree. Interestingly enough, in an Argentine newspaper, when they were on their way back, that gigantic flotilla with an aircraft carrier they sent down to study the penguins, ding, right? They were doing something down there. And the Nazis made a real effort to go down there and have New Schwabenland and drop all the Nazi flags over the place and try and claim huge chunks of Antarctica. These aren't mutually exclusive theories. The other 2 persistent rumors that have been around for many, many decades, probably since well before I was born, is that there's ruins under the ice of an ancient human civilization, or perhaps not human civilization, but a civilization that existed here on Earth that's underneath the ice, and or that there is a ship or ships that are in the ice, as in spacecraft. So I'm curious if the Luciferians, because remember, they're law-abiding. They believe in a rules-based society. So they would actually want to have the legal right in order to access some of these ruins or ships, or perhaps declare the rights to, that if the Nazi International was to finally come out of hiding after 80 years and declare itself, that perhaps they would be and we have the legal right to this part of Antarctica because of what happened with Argentina. Of course, Argentina is where the Nazi International fled after the war. Excellent research by Dr. Joseph Farrell, in particular fascinating. Most all American presidents, I'm not sure if Trump went, that's one I don't know about, but up through Obama, almost every single American post-war president went down to San Carlos de Bariloche, down in Argentina, which is where many sort of Nazi international scholars believe that Martin Bormann in particular fled. And that was the genius who was behind the organizational structures of the Third Reich. He kind of created a deep state, if you will, within the Third Reich. And the Nazis were kind of like, they were doing all right, but they were kind of stumbly bumbly until he became Hitler's private secretary. And then he put a private secretary under each of the high command that all then reported to him. And all of a sudden, Nazi Germany was humming. There was a well-oiled machine. It was because Martin Bormann is probably amongst the all-time greatest organizational geniuses who's ever lived. Profoundly evil, but incredibly, incredibly, incredibly intelligent. And he saw the writing on the wall by 1943 that Germany was going to lose. And so he started moving personnel and assets to Argentina, among elsewhere. So it's curious to me that right in that stronghold, that I'm certain is still a Nazi international stronghold, all of a sudden you have this libertarian guy rising to power, this Millet guy, who is weirdly on his knees hardcore for Israel. Even stranger when you consider that milieu that he's arising out of, right? These post-war Nazi international. So I can't help but see a connection here between Antarctica, the Nazi international, Argentina, and this rising of Javier Millet. So very interesting, something I'm going to keep an eye on, something I think that you guys should also keep an eye on. So also interesting, you know how I often talk about how it'll seem like some kind of crime that the Molochians have committed has kind of been successfully swept under the rug, and then whoop, it pops back up, right? Like, for example, the Epstein thing, it just won't go away. And remember a couple of episodes when I pointed that out, I said, the Molochians are going to block this and thereby out themselves, because everyone who votes and pushes to block this is more or less incriminating themselves. I'm talking about Senator Marsha Blackburn's subpoena of the Epstein flight logs. Well, sure enough, as predicted, Senator Dick Durbin has blocked Marsha Blackburn, and he has some support. I just saw this headline before I came on the show, but I just thought it was amazing because I had said they're going to block it, and that's just going to be fodder and fuel for the upcoming 2024 election. Because it won't stop with Marsha Blackburn's attempt. There'll be more, and a stronger one next time. And the Molochians will have to push back harder, thereby revealing themselves more. Then it will get pushed, and eventually it'll break open, and all those people that tried to block it will almost certainly be exposed, either as assets who were willing to help or as direct participants in that. So I just thought that was interesting that it didn't take long. It took about 10 days before someone blocked that, of course. But it won't go away. Watch. It'll come up again. I promise. It's gonna keep coming up. Drip, drip, drip. On a similar note, Seth Rich's laptop. Now, Seth Rich, if you don't know, he worked for the Clinton campaign in 2016. And Kim.com, who's an internet celebrity, he started some kind of media thing down in New Zealand, I think. And I don't know if he's a billionaire, but he's quite wealthy. He said outright that he helped connect Seth Rich with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And that, I can't remember if it was the Hillary emails or the Podesta emails or both, that they were, some amount of that Podesta or Hillary emails came out via Seth Rich. Julian Assange himself hinted at that heavily when he offered $130,000 for any information about the murder of Seth Rich. And then someone immediately asked the obvious question, is Seth Rich your source? And Julian Assange said, oh, we never burn our sources. We never expose our sources, blah, blah. But it's like, well, Julian, you just did, right? And someone down in Texas has successfully won, and it's been ordered now by a judge, that his Freedom of Information Act request around that laptop and its contents must be honored by the FBI. So that's going to cause the Molochians to go into scramble mode. But consider, how did the Molochians not get to that judge? They must have known that was out there. How did they not stop it? How did they not stop Geert Wilders? How did they not stop Millet? Right? They must know in all of these cases that this stuff is happening, and yet they're unable to stop it. How? If it was just regular people or most high-aligned people, they'd be stopped 100%. That means someone powerful intervened in all of those cases. Some powerful group intervened in order to get rid of mail-in ballots and to ensure that Millet and Geert Wilders won. Now, there's an obvious country in the Middle East, and I don't want to go too much into this one, that would have intervened on the behalf of people who share certain beliefs, right? Zionism, right? But hopefully that doesn't trigger the algorithm. I'm not too worried about human censors, but I am very worried about algorithm censors. I'm just not big enough yet for human censors, really. So, yeah, that could be a one explanation that doesn't then discredit, or that's not it's not mutually exclusive from the Luciferian versus Molochian thing, and it in fact is like kind of one and the same. Powerful interest interceded in every one of these cases. I guarantee it. There's no effing way that something that has to do with the Clintons doesn't get clamped down on for sure, unless someone very powerful is backing it to ram it through. Period. So there was something that I had never heard before that was part of those WikiLeaks dumps, which I find fascinating. And that is that there is a 0 point energy or free energy reference in an email from Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut from, I think it's Apollo 14, sixth man on the moon, who was saying he wanted to talk to Podesta, who was very friendly to disclosure. He wanted to talk to Podesta about disclosure of extraterrestrials, or at least the high ultra tech, and 0 point energy. Now, I think Edgar Mitchell was naive politically and innocent, but it was interesting to me that way back in 2015, 2016, Mitchell was saying, well, he wanted to work with the Russians and the Chinese to talk about this disclosure of both of these things, the 0 point energy and disclosure of UFOs, right? But he said maybe not Russia because of what they're doing in Ukraine, which I'm like, what? And I guess that was probably around the time when I think it was 2014 there was the putsch by NATO where they put the Ukrainian neo-Nazis into power. And then there was a counter pushback, which was the Crimean election, where Crimea, which is plausible to me, it's just the number 99% or whatever it was. That's a little hard for me to believe. I don't think you can get 99% agreement on almost anything, right? So that's a little questionable to me and tells me it was probably a tampered with at least election, even though I understand why Russia felt that it was an existential threat because their only warm water naval base they own is in Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. So it's curious to me that Edgar Mitchell would mention Ukraine many years before the major war breaks out. And makes me wonder, maybe I'm wrong about Mitchell. Maybe he wasn't as politically naive as I thought. But for him to mention 0 point energy, disclosure, and Ukraine in the same email, it's just kind of like, you know what I mean? Ukraine is also really important because a very important culture, vastly predating the Khazarians, was also in Ukraine, and that's the Scythians. And the Scythians seem to be a seed culture for a huge percentage of European culture, and they had a very powerful magic tradition. I'm of the opinions that the Scythians, when they invaded North India, brought with them what is now called Vedic astrology, which is what I do. And one of the things that's been happening in this war that I've been keeping an eye on is the Russians have repeatedly been raiding museums that have Scythian artifacts in them and taking the artifacts. Very curious. It's smacks of when there was the Iraq War, and one of the very first things that happened was we invaded Baghdad, and our soldiers were surrounding the Baghdad Museum, and yet they were told to stand down and let people loot the museum. And it wasn't mostly gold that was taken. It was mostly cuneiform cylinder seals, the oldest records of humanity. And in both of these cases, the Scythians and the Museum of Baghdad, I believe that it's magicians that are directing this looting who want ancient magical texts in their freshest form. So yeah, that's the Seth Rich thing popping up. Very interesting. I thought that was never going to come up again. And yet here we are. It came back up again. These are things. And what was the crux of the Seth Rich thing? It's one of the four, and maybe more, maybe two of the four. Remember, the Molochian strong points are also their weak points. They're also their Achilles heel. The Babylonian money magic, usury, right? That old money system, the banking system, right? Which is on the chopping block now as they're moving to the quantum blockchain financial system. Most people don't like the bankers and usury. That's an Achilles heel, therefore, even though it's also a strong point. It's their debt and what allows them to bribe everyone. Then you have, obviously, the pokey poke recent democide attempt. That's an Achilles heel. That's one that the Luciferians have to be very careful with because they're involved in that very directly. Same thing with banking, but that's easier for them to hide their fingerprints there. It's much harder, in my opinion, right? Like, how does Trump walk back Operation Warp Speed, right? He's going to have to say some shit about white hats putting in saline, and he tried to save people, and he couldn't stop it or whatever. You know what I mean? It's difficult for them. They have to be careful with that one. Then there's the Epstein stuff. That's a slam dunk for the Luciferians. They don't participate in that. They've maybe penetrated those groups in order to get data on it with operatives. And then, of course, the Utah data center has all that information, which that's really the turning point in this war and set the stage for it was when the NSA, which I believe is a primarily Luciferian organization, turned on the data center and then in real time could see the people like the black nobility doing the horrible things that they do and record it. Right. So then the fourth Malakan Achilles heel is all the election irregularities. Right. And that's at the crux of the Seth Rich thing. The Epstein thing is in there, too, and the Podesta emails. The so-called, and I won't say this, but the so-called Italian flat pie that you can eat with cheese and tomato sauce gate. Right. Remember when that erupted? That also felt like a layered intelligence operation to me. Someone getting out the truth and someone hiding it. In particular, some of the information that came out around that Comet Pizza thing was definitely like an intelligence operation that was designed in part to mislead. But that was back when the Luciferians would work hand in glove with the Molochians, and therefore the Molochians appeared much more sophisticated in those days. Okay, so that is all the news for the week. And whoa, a lot of comments over here. I haven't been looking at these at all. All right, so moving in the Q&A section here. Let me take a drink. So Clint Corley, I'll just put this up. What up, Clint? Clint, I hope this is okay to say. I'm just going to out you. Clint was one of my angelic magic students, and I hope you had a blast. Great man. Wonderful person doing good work in the world, and hopefully the angelic magic class was really uplifting for you. I believe you said it was, but I won't put words in your mouth. Let's see, so Tim says, hey Ian, sorry man, I was the WEF guy from last week pointing out Javier Millet's connections. Thanks for clarifying. Love your work and always stand for. Oh, thank you, Tim. Hey dude, I don't mind people pushing back or correcting me or whatever. What you wrote wasn't rude. You'll notice that comment stuff. I do get people who are just, they're just nasty and they say mean things. I don't mind. I make mistakes and I'm not always right. You know, like I'm wrong often, and my stock portfolio loss gain thing can show that, right? You know what I mean? Like I've made plenty of mistakes and errors in judgment. And so I actually really appreciate the community that's starting to form around this channel, or like my angelic magic classes are going to have a signal group that they're going to have. I'm hopeful to help a community form around this, not for me to be the head of it or anything, but for people who are like-minded, who see the spiritual battle that's going on, and who also are able to think with depth and nuance rather than just being reactionary and black and white thinkers. And that, of course, means that we're going to have disagreements because we're not a Molochian hive mind. We are a group of people who have integrity and are trying to figure out the truth in a very confusing, very rapidly changing time. And so I appreciate that. And yeah, you know, the WEF, I will say, is deeply penetrated by the Luciferians. It would have to be, and all the Malakan power structures are: the Pentagon, the banking system, IMF, right, BIS, the World Economic Forum, the UN, the Gavi and the Who, they're all filled with both Molochians and Luciferians. And it can be difficult to discern like who's who. I'm of the opinion that it's certainly not a marker of something that I like when I see that someone has been like a former WF member. I'm one of the politicians that I was super into and feel really sad about nowadays is Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, I think she's better than most. She is certainly in the Luciferian milieu, but I'm very disappointed with her. She's a former WEF person. I think she's working a lot of agendas, and I think that she, in particular, probably because she lost friends, she's definitely is like basically Islamophobic, it seems to me. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't criticize the things in Islam that aren't good, or Judaism or Christianity or whatever, right? Or actors who act under those labels. But I do think that Tulsi, unfortunately, is a bit Islamophobic, and that comes through in her politics quite often. And at this point, I don't know what to think about her, but I certainly do not trust Javier Milei. That guy does not have a good vibe to me. He has the lowest vibe of this raft of Luciferians who've recently swept into power. The Milei, Geert Wilders, Malone, I forget what her first name is, there in Italy, and then of course Trump. Of those four, none of them are particularly like positive. I probably, because I don't know much about her, like Maloney the best, and I have a soft spot for women. But of those four, by far the darkest vibe of any of those four is this Milei guy. He scares me a bit. Like, he's very, very extreme. A lot of the stuff he says. I'm pretty much of the opinion the government that governs least governs best. I tend to agree with that. I think Jefferson said that, or one of the founding fathers. I tend to agree with that. That said, if Milei really goes through with the level of gutting that he's talking about with the Argentine government, I don't see how that society would probably have at least some collapse. Like, I don't know if he's planning on doing it in some kind of constructive, intelligent way of like a slow phasing out of these things and moving over, or whether he plans to do what he says, which is just on day one, well, I guess not day one because it would have already happened by now, but that his plan is to try and just defund almost the entirety of the Argentine government. I mean, sure, some of them like gender studies or whatever, and with a multi-million-dollar budget in a country that's swimming in debt, sure, probably go ahead and cut that. But he wanted to cut like the scientific something or other thing. And I was like, bro, what? Like, man, you got to have a little bit of government in there. And probably it's not a bad idea for your government to have some idea about science and the advance of science, But anyways, yeah, just because someone's been in the WF doesn't mean they're Molochian, even though that is certainly a Molochian organization. And I just see Milei as part of this Luciferian cabal, if you will, this counter cabal. So Randy Neon said, sorry I'm late. He apparently was harassed by murder hornets. I think he was probably commenting on the laughable psyops that the Molochians ran out. It was probably way back then when I was talking about some of these laughable psyops. Like, I laugh every time I say monkeypox. Didn't they have like a test audience to try that out on monkeypox? Like, come on, guys. Like they're just not even trying anymore. Living Free. Hi, Ian. I'm glad I caught the live stream. Yeah, glad you caught it too, Living Free. All right. Randy says then Whitney struggles with the esoteric. Yeah, I see Whitney. I think she's on the spectrum, if I had to make a guess. And spectrumy people often have really good hearts, but they struggle with nuance, but they're so insanely dogged in their research and often have such a high IQ. But what they usually lack is an EQ. And EQ makes lacking EQ makes it difficult to see subtleties in human behavior. And so, I mean, I don't know if she's actually on the spectrum. I have two members of my family who are, and just some of her behaviors remind me of that. I think she's a good person. I do wonder, like, she's so incredibly effective at blackpilling people by telling the truth that I do wonder at times if she's an operative. I just don't think so. And if she is, she's a dupe, not like she goes to Langley for orders, but that she's been duped and is being fed stuff. I mean, the sheer volume of information that woman churns out makes her a bit suspect, but it could be explained by being on the spectrum and just never getting bored, no matter how dry the material is that you're looking at. I'll just say it. I have a brother on the spectrum, and this to me distills one of the qualities that makes people who are on the spectrum so incredibly good at research. And that is, I used to be incredible at Mortal Kombat 2. I was just really good at it. I could beat anyone pretty much in the arcade. And when I moved to Walla Walla, when I was a teenager, I dominated it. I owned the local 7-Eleven where Mortal Kombat 2 was. Woe be for anyone playing that if I were to come into the shop, because I just take the quarters. And then it came out on Super Nintendo, and so I was playing on Super Nintendo, and my brother, who's on the spectrum, I just beat him every time. Just mop the floor with him. And one day he was like, let's play Mortal Kombat. And so we played it, and I beat him a bunch, and he beat me a couple times, and I noticed he was getting better. And then it was summertime, and for the next 3 days, he played it like 12 or 14 hours, 16 hours a day for 3 straight days against the computer. And I saw him doing that, and I would occasionally say, hey, dude, like, you're going to overheat the Super Nintendo. Like, dude, you can't play that so much. And he'd be like, yeah, whatever, and just keep playing away. And he said, hey, after 3 days, he was like, hey, Ian, you want to play? And I said, yeah. And I never beat him ever again at Mortal Kombat 2. He had just played for like 48 hours over the course of 3 days, and I could never beat him ever again. And the thing is I couldn't play that long because I would get bored, but he doesn't get bored. He doesn't get bored. And so that allows you to do, when you're looking to really dry material and tracing this shell company and looking at this payout thing, and that's where all the juicy stuff is, because they put it in super dry text, right? Like if you ever read banking documents from like the IMF or World Bank and your eyes don't glaze over within like maybe 5 minutes of reading that shit, you might be on the spectrum because they intentionally put it in really dry language that will just cause most people to go, oh God, I can't read this, it's horrible. And Whitney reads all that shit. And so her research is chef's kiss good. But the problem is, because she doesn't deliver any nuance, and because she doesn't acknowledge the spiritual layer, and because she seems to not recognize that there's shades of gray in human behavior, it just really does seem that way to me, because she lumps together Klaus Schwab and Musk as though they're the exact same, and they're obviously not, right? Because Musk got rid of pedo on Twitter within like 2 weeks, and it's never come back. And somehow the previous guy just couldn't do it over 11 years, right? So that's a difference. Is it enough of a difference to back Musk? Well, that's an individual decision, right? But it is a difference, and she can't seem to see that. And so I love her research, but I wish that she would temper it a little bit with some hope. And it would be nice if she put that big brain of hers to work on solutions rather than just identifying the problem. I think most people can identify the problem of there's massive amounts of corruption. And what we need hyper intelligent people to be thinking about is, how do we solve it? Oh, that reminds me. Well, I'll talk about it once I get done with some Q&A. I'll try and talk about Golden Age Enclaves. I should really just do a whole show on it, really. It's that Lucy deception. Nothing's black and white. Yeah, exactly. The Luciferians rely on people thinking it's black and white. That gives them that seam then that they can work in that confuses everyone, because they're neither and both. So let's see. Devin said, thanks for saying this. Yes, Whitney tends to black pill me. I know. I get a shot of fear through my body. No bueno. Yeah, I know. I mean, again, massive brain on that woman. I'm sure she's smarter than me. Like probably like a standard deviation higher IQ than me. And I have a pretty high IQ, at least. Like maybe more than that. I don't know. She's crazy smart. And I just can't tell if she's a completely emotionally dead sociopath or if she's on the spectrum and a reasonable player. I think she's on the spectrum and a good person who doesn't understand the impact she has and is very interested in the quality of her data and really nothing else. If you know Enneagram, she's an Enneagram 5, 4 days. She's like, short of Stephen Hawking, she's the most Enneagram 5 person I've ever seen ever. So let's see here. Amazing analysis, but I have to drop. We'll review the recording. Alex, right on. Oh, that's Alex DiNardo, another angelic student of mine. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have said your full name there, Alex. Sorry, I'm the worst for outing people. But Alex is amazing, amazing human being. Shout out to you, Alex. Glad he could make it. Incredibly knowledgeable man, really good man up there. And oh well, why not completely freaking dox him? Ian, doesn't matter where he is. He's somewhere on the earth. My God, I didn't even say all that, Alex. This is why I could never be an intelligence agent, because I would just like blabber everything, you know. So peace, Ian, everyone. The White Loves the Light chat. Yeah, if you left, Rich, see ya. Thanks for stopping in. Clint said, any thoughts of Jordan Peterson, Luciferian or most high? Come on, you already know the answer to that one. Come on. He's obviously on Team Lucy. like I like Jordan Peterson. I respect him, but he's libertarian for days, right? He's Luciferian, in my opinion, right? Talking about state of consciousness, I'm not suggesting Jordan Peterson worships Lucifer. He obviously worships a fine lobster dinner in a clean bedroom. Okay, similar prisoners. Have you ever read of any case of Jewish refugees and Operation Paperclip Nazis having tension, being at odds when they were forced to work together in Manhattan Project type operations or NASA? Wow, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I don't know the answer to it, is the answer, but I would love to. I wish I knew the answer to this question, I guess would be better put. Interesting. Now, the Manhattan Project, of course, happens concurrent with the Nazis still being in power in Germany. So I don't think you would see that in the Manhattan Project specifically. At NASA, however, where they're Jewish rocket scientists and German paperclip scientists, quite possibly. What I believe is that the Nazis have publicly abandoned, but not privately, have publicly abandoned all of their race and also LGBTQ their extreme racism and their anti-LGBTQ stuff and inverted it and pretend to like it. Look at Germany under Angela Merkel, who a lot of people say, I don't know if this one's true. It is an interesting theory, but a lot of people say that Angela Merkel is the love child of Eva Braun and Hitler. I don't know if it's true. That would certainly be not cool in the sense of hooray, but more like that would be kind of like a interesting, sexy conspiracy theory, even if it has nightmarish implications, right? You know, if you look at Merkel's Germany, like for sure, they really were like, oh, we're so sorry about the whole World War II thing. Oh, we love the gays so much. Rainbow flag this, love parade that, right? Like Germany is like where most of not most, but a lot of the most insane hyper woke stuff, particularly around gender theory, seems to come out of post-war Germany, not directly after the war, but, you know, like modern Germany, I guess I should say. And I can't help but think the Nazi International will abandon Germany and the German people after the war, although a huge amount of Nazis were immediately put into power in West Berlin right after the war, barely skipping a beat, right? They just sort of went up there with the stencil and crossed out the Fuhrer and like wrote in president of operations or whatever, right? They, you know, the entire West German apparatus after the war was Nazis. And then taking a step further, the EU sure sounds like Martin Bormann / Hitler's dream of a unified European continent under a singular currency that was the Deutschmark. There's some websites that still calculate the value, the projected value of the Deutschmark based on prior German way they managed their currency and the GDP of Germany and so forth. And the Deutschmark is the most valuable part of the euro. For those websites that analyze that this is what the franc would be worth, this is what the lira would be worth, this is what the mark would be worth. The mark is like 2/3 or something insane of what the euro would be worth. And it sure looks like the EU is a Nazi creation, because If you look into the origin of the EU, it comes from steel and coal tariffs out of Germany in the 50s. So, yeah, the 50s. That's not that long after Toothbrush Mustache Man fled to Argentina, right? So, you know, and then you look at, I'm actually going to find this graphic again because it's so on point with what we're discussing here. If I can find this, there's a graphic that I want to summon from the bowels of my infinite amounts of various different little like diagrams and pictures and memes and whatnot. Come on, big money, that I can find this fairly easily because it'd be so perfect here. Oh, darn it. Oh, yeah. Okay, hang on a second. So now I got to now remind myself, as I have to do every time, how to do this counterintuitive thing. Okay, so we're going to share the screen. Yes. There it is. Wow. Boom. Here it is. Okay, so this is just scratching the surface of the post-war Nazi International and how they immediately were at the center of power. So you got Wernher von Braun, head of NASA, right? He also brought a far more important person with him named Kurt Davis, who also worked at Bell Helicopter. Great research by Peter Dale Scott, Dr. Joseph Farrell, dark journalist Daniel List on these post-war Nazi International, and I yield to their expertise and their far superior research, and you should check it out. There's a vast volume of work to sift through, but those guys are the gold standard. So Walter Hallstein, head of the EU Commission. Yes, that's very curious. Adolf Husinger, NATO's chief of staff. Wait a minute. Why would NATO support Nazis in Ukraine? Kurt Waldheim, Secretary General of the United Nations. Again, this is barely scratching the surface of the Nazi International and its power base in the West. It's insane. So one of the theories that I sort of think about a lot is if you look at who are the three most demonized countries on Earth, often with good reason, right, of who is like does the worst in the media, it's Russia, the US, and Israel, right? People say, oh, Israel, blah, blah, blah. Well, Israel's been getting slapped in the media recently, for starters, so the worm has turned on that one in a big, big way, which is a interesting marker to me of something has shifted, something very significant. I just saw this thing on Jimmy Dore today that some Israeli think tank did a head count, and in the first week after the attacks by Hamas on the 7th, so in the first 6 days, that it was something like 65% of all protests, or maybe 55%, were pro-Palestinian in nature. But starting on the 13th, which is when Israel really went ham on the people in Gaza, like the horrible tragedy that's unfolding there. And by the way, the Hamas thing, I condemn that as well. I condemn mass murder. I don't know. I guess that's just the standard I have, is I condemn mass murder regardless of who does it. I'm just weird that way. But once they started going nuts in Gaza, now it's 95% of protests are against Israel and pro-Palestinian. So this is all new. This is something fundamental has shifted there. So I've toyed with the idea that if you look at who's really vilified in the media, the three most vilified countries in the media really, really, really are the US, Russia. To some degree, the UK gets some heat, although they are relatively unscathed compared to those other two. So the US, Russia, UK to some degree, and then especially Israel, but especially the US, Russia, and Israel. Who defeated the Nazis during World War II? Right? It was a coalition of international Jewry, right, which would become then Israel. The British, of course, but the Russian Americans especially, right? And so I have wondered if who's behind a lot of the happenings on Earth. Well, I haven't wondered that. I know for a fact a lot of the deep geopolitical events, the Nazi International is involved in it to a greater or lesser degree. There are some people that contend, and this is an interesting theory, some people contend that the Nazis won World War II. Germany lost World War II, but the Nazis won World War II, but they won it like 10 to 15 years after the official end of World War II. And they did that by infiltration. And when you see that chart I just put up a minute ago, and you see the head of NATO there, that becomes a quite compelling argument when you consider paperclip, the CIA, and the weaponization of space and some of the stuff. Very interesting. And that's a geopolitical nexus of power that, because of its clandestine nature, right? They also had like Altrag or whatever, where they were launching rockets from Africa in the 60s and 70s. James Bond movie hinted at that, actually, with I think Spectre might have been talking about the Nazi International, actually, to some degree. It's just interesting. But there was a literal German rocket program out of Africa in the 70s where they were using actually really high-tech, like, modular rockets. And then that just kind of like, I haven't been able to like spend enough time to really drill into that, but very interesting. I guess Kurt Davis turned to Wernher von Braun after the launch of the V2 rocket and said, we've just created the first spaceship, because it went up into the upper atmosphere and then came down, and they used it mostly on London, right? The UK, but interesting, right? And especially when you consider, and I'm not going there, I'm not making a declaration, I find that World War II is the most instructive single period of time in modern history for understanding deep power and the puppet masters that run things. I find that there's a tremendous amount of obfuscation and bad information around World War II. It's not nearly as clear cut as we think, and that's not letting anyone off the hook. There was atrocities on all sides, mega atrocities on all sides. There was horror on all sides, and anyone who says otherwise is full of shit, right? The firebombing of Dresden, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, the very poor treatment of prisoner of war, right? Obviously, the Holocaust, it goes without saying. The gulags in Russia, just a lot of the Stalinist purges in Russia. The Japanese, the rape of Nanking and the comfort women and all that stuff. Like anyone who tries to tell you that, oh, well, blah, 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 the good guys in World War II. No, that's Hollywood bullshit. World War II is very, very dark, very murky, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult to suss out for me because of the obfuscation around the information of that time period. I find it to be very, very deeply murky, because I think the actual rulers were very exposed in that conflict. And so they want to obfuscate the real power dynamics of that war in a major, major way. However, I will say I find it interesting, the obsession with space thing. And I'm just going to leave it at that. And I don't know, because I find all of the sides in World War II to have engaged in both Molochian and Luciferian handiworks, with some being the only one that seems just purely Molochian without even a veneer of Luciferian is the communists under Stalin were just, if you asked me where would you put a gun to my head and said your family's going to be transported, mind you, some of my family are Jewish, right? They're going to be transported to Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia. Oh, I'd choose Nazi Germany every single time, not because I think they're better. It arguably might be much less safe for my family, although people forget Stalin purged a lot of Jews once he came to power. But I would choose Nazi Germany simply because there is a chance of escape there. There's a chance of you could buy your way out or bribe your way out or whatever, use your noodle and get out of there. There really wasn't any real way to get out of Stalinist Russia. It was virtually impossible. And it was just much, much, much darker in my estimation. All right. Josh Whitehall said, who would be a most high leader in the current scene? I get this question all the time. The answer is very few. The one I would say that seems to be is the monarchy in Bhutan and the monarchy in Jordan, the king of Jordan. I forget what his name is. The king of Jordan successfully avoided he and his father successfully avoided all the entanglements with Israel and more or less have been kind of like, except for not with a negative connotation, somewhat the Switzerland of the Middle East. And they've had Jews and Muslims and Christians living side by side there for forever. And it's been a very peaceful country. They've avoided all these wars of the past 40 or 50 years. Curiously, they cut off diplomatic contact with Israel, which is another never happened before kind of thing that tells me that what's happening in Israel right now is very different from what we've seen in the past. I say that Bhutan thing with a lot more ignorance than the Jordan thing. I feel fairly comfortable saying the Jordan thing. He's at least on the high ebb of Luciferian, low ebb of Most High aligned. I think the short answer is kind of nobody, because if you're talking pure Most High, right, where you're in that upper end of the diagram, let me just pop that diagram up in case there's any viewers that don't know what we're talking about here. This Venn diagram that sort of explains the overlap and differences. Man, my Shadow Wars meme collection here is freaking vast. I really at some point need someone to help me find these kind of things like Joe Rogan has. Maybe I need to get to 1 million viewers and then I'll be able to hire someone. Okay, so let me put this up real quick. And by real quick, I mean extremely slowly, because I should have a helper to do this sort of thing. Let's see here. Okay, there's that. And then, oh, there it is. All right. So if you're talking, I think it was Josh Whitehall asked me this. Sorry, whoever it was. Sorry if I got your name wrong. If you're saying who's like up here in the pure Most High thing, I don't think anyone is. There are individuals on the earth, but they're not going to be in power. They're going to almost certainly be, like working in the third world to help people, maybe living under a bridge because they've given away all their wealth. They're going to be working in nonprofits or whatever. They're probably just not going to have any power at all because they won't seek power. They're not interested in power. So unless it's someone who's sort of fairly awake and maybe probably only in a monarchy, simply because that is hereditary, and therefore a child who is good could get into that position by blood without having to work their way up through a hierarchy. It's possible, but probably not in that upper end at all, just because that consciousness is very difficult to achieve in the Kali Yuga. Now, if you mean they're here in this high ebb of Luciferianism and lower end of Most High, yes, that's possible. And that's where I would say, with some degree of ignorance, based on an outside observer who doesn't know that much about Bhutan, it seems like Bhutan is that way because, similar to Jordan, they've been able to avoid most of the entanglements in the Middle East. And there's actually, I think it's Liechtenstein or something like that, that actually seems to have a pretty good vibe. That's one of those microstates in Europe, and they are doing banking, but they've managed to avoid like a lot of the wars in Europe for centuries now. And it could be that there's people in some of those smaller countries like Monaco, Liechtenstein, probably not Monaco, but maybe Liechtenstein, and I forget what the other one is that's in the Pyrenees. But it's possible that, some people in some of those microstates maybe like who are in leadership positions. But I think as a general rule, there aren't a lot of Most High leaders in the sense of power elite politicians. There's people who are in positions of leadership, but again, more than likely, they're not going to seek out the limelight, and they're probably doing modest work that doesn't particularly catch the attention of the Molochian Luciferian media. And so there's not a lot. The closest to it is the King of Jordan, and I think Bhutan, the royalty in Bhutan, I think is that way, but I guess I don't know. I've heard people say, oh no, the Buddhists exploit the poor peasant people and blah, because everyone's a critic, right? It's that Whitney Webb thing again. Like if someone isn't like floating 3 feet above the water because walking on water isn't good enough, then they're not a good guy. And like, oh, there's classes in that. It's not a utopian society. There's class structures and the monks aren't working, so that means they're automatically exploiting the peasants from a Marxist viewpoint, But it seems like Bhutan is pretty good as far as country goes, I mean, again, you can't compare it to an ideal. You have to compare it to its peers. And I'm going to take Bhutan over pretty much any country that I can think of off the top of the dome. So yeah, living free. In a Luciferian world, will most high people be able to achieve high levels of success without selling their souls? Interesting question. Yes. If they're extremely smart, they're extremely savvy, they understand that the Luciferians will not abide by being challenged, meaning that if you overtly, especially in the Bronze Age when they're consolidating power, and especially the cusp of the Bronze Age, right? If you try and subvert their agenda, they will consider you a hostile and an enemy. So you will be able to rise to the top, but it will be very difficult because someone who is most high aligned will likely be unwilling to do subterfuge and dirty play, which the Luciferians will not have any such fetter. They won't have anything holding them back. So it's going to be difficult to beat them. You know, it's like Chris Paul or gosh, what was that great point guard for Utah? He's the all-time assist leader. Anyways, I can't think of his name, but he was voted every year as like the dirtiest player in the NBA. And so he's also John Stockton. He's also considered one of the greatest point guards of all time. And he was able to elevate his game to a higher plane. And so is Chris Paul by being extremely dirty, right? And so there are people who aren't dirty who are even better than either of them. I don't care for Steph Curry from a personality viewpoint, but he's more talented, and he doesn't, to my knowledge, isn't a dirty player. People like Draymond Green and others on the Warriors are dirty players, but he himself, to my knowledge, is not a particularly dirty player, actually a pretty clean player, and he just is even better. So if you can get to that level of excellence, then you'll be rewarded because it will be a meritocratic system. What I would say, though, is that, and it was something I was going to have as one of the pillars of this episode, is that Golden Age Enclaves are what I've been directed to, and that other people will be moved in this direction to create them. They'll be essentially, well, I mean, they're exactly what they say, Golden Age Enclaves. There'll be areas where people will be able to operate and create most high culture and civilization within a prescribed area. Meaning, you going back to Patagonia, you could set up shop in Patagonia, and since that's not like a financial hub and there's not like Silicon Valley there or some nuclear sub base or something like that, the Luciferians would go like, yeah, go ahead. You guys want to make a little Golden Age Enclave there? We don't care. Now, if you try and use that Golden Age Enclave as a base of operations to attack us, either militarily, which would be phenomenally dumb and end quickly in favor of the Luciferians, or you try and push your culture out onto us that is in contravention to Luciferian ideals and principles, then they'll see you as an enemy, then they'll attack you. But if you keep to your own and you let them run the planet and you don't interfere with, in particular, spacefaring and technology advancement, then they'll leave you alone. That's what the angels have told me, and that's what other deities have told me, that you'll be able to have these, and they'll be able to trade with one another and create a network with one another that, again, if it doesn't overtly challenge the main power structures of the Luciferians, they'll leave it alone in the sense that they won't send their UFO anti-gravity warships to blow it up. What they will do is try and subvert it and try and especially like get to the kids and get the kids to be more greedy and more selfish and self-centered and narcissistic, and try and get Golden Age Enclave girls to have an OnlyFans and an Instagram, right? They'll try and subvert it. They'll try and lie. They'll try and use propaganda. They might try and create class warfare divisions, much like that thing I said about Bhutan a little bit ago. They might say, oh, well, there's some people who, by the nature of their job, they're not doing the hard work that the Golden Age Enclave farmers are doing. Golden Age Enclave farmers, you should attack the scientists who are have no calluses on their hands. So there'll be that kind of stuff they will do, but they won't like roll in the tanks and kill everyone or enslave everyone the way the Molochians do. They'll actually be expressly forbidden from doing that, both by their leadership, but also by their deity. Won't allow it. His whole goal is to use free will to prove that free will was a mistake, right? I mean, that's the story, right? That's the mythos. And there's an essence in that that's true. He wants to prove that humans will put themselves at the center rather than God if they're given free will. And, based on the cultural move from self-hatred to narcissism, right now, that argument looks pretty compelling. And it's because his spirit is ascendant right now. The nice thing is that eventually at the end of the Silver Age, 6,000 years from now, people will be tapped out. People will be exhausted of Luciferianism and how hollow that becomes, in the same way that people are currently just exhausted and sick of the dead materialist, fear-based Molochian system. And people are just done. People are done with it. Yeah, there's some super self-hating people who love wallowing in victimhood and they love having power over other people through passive-aggressive victimhood and all that stuff. But really, 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 the good people on earth, the people who are spiritually aware, they're done. Some people who are even just like, hey, I want to have a meritocratic system where the best of the best rise to the top, right? Or I'm an Instagram model and these stupid Malakan assholes are preventing me from travel. What? They're going to take away my ability to travel? Oh my God, right? Like maybe their idea wasn't the greatest, what they want, but they're sick of it. Everyone's sick to death of this Molochian system because the zeitgeist is turned against them. And in a similar way, 6,000 years from now, people will be sick to death of the hollow narcissism and putting ourselves at the center instead of putting God at the center. And by which I mean, I don't mean worshiping some man in a cloud and shaming people for masturbating, God at the center, Catholic Church nonsense. I mean truly where you recognize that you are one with God and everyone else is part of God and everyone is a beautiful divine expression of the Most High, and that therefore it's automatic that we take care of one another. It's automatic that we love thy neighbor as thyself, the core teaching of Yeshua, right? So Brenda Melendez, hey Brenda, nice to see you. Brenda's friends with me on Facebook, and she connected me with Tom Siebert, so tip of the hat to Brenda. I wonder where natural law and paganism fits in the framework of Luciferians and Molochians. Oh, well, I mean, Luciferians obey natural law. They try and like bend natural law to their favor, but they, as a general rule, they won't directly try to like invert or break natural law. They try and bend it to the maximum, to the breaking point, or right up to that point. Like, for example, I used the example earlier of transhumanism, which to me in a certain sense is against natural law, but it's also not, especially in the upcoming age or even in the current age. Unfortunately, it's not. I mean, right now, natural law weirdly dictates that because we're in the Kali Yuga, this is counterintuitive, but natural law is sort of suspended in favor of inversion and blasphemy and like slavery. And, it's the dark night of the soul. We need to plumb the depths of evil, stare into the abyss and have the abyss stare back, all that kind of stuff. And so paganism is a much broader subject because technically Molochianism and Luciferian are both pagan, right? As are very neutral nature spirit worship, fae, elementals. I mean, Hinduism is pagan, right? Basically anything that's not the big three Abrahamic faiths is pagan. And so that being such a broad umbrella, I would say it includes both. I mean, Molochianism is technically like a pagan religion. Same thing with Luciferian. They're both pagan. They're both outside of the Judeo-Christian, the Abrahamic faith milieu, right? I mean, they're contained within it in the sense that they're referenced in the holy texts, although Lucifer's really only referenced once, and most people think it's actually, a lot of scholars think that it was an insult or a description of Nebuchadnezzar II. I tend to agree. I don't think that Lucifer is particularly shown, although I think the character, which is possibly described as the devil or Satan, I can't remember exactly, of who talks to God during the book of Job. That character has a flavor to me of Luciferianism rather than Molochianism. He's trying to subvert. He's trying to get Job to castigate or denounce God out of his own free will through difficult circumstances, and that has more of a Luciferian flavor to me. A Malakan would just force you to do it, would torture you until you did or killed you, right? Or wouldn't even care. And they would try and get you to do something particularly disgusting. If you're talking about modern neo-paganism, well, that's probably mostly Luciferian, abiding by natural law and nature worship. But, like a lot of the nature worshiping religions of the ancients had a fairly dark flavor to it. That's where some of the confusion around Satan comes in, is that the Celtic god Cernunnos, the horn god, who did allow for human sacrifice in order to do like the killing of the king ritual and the renewal of the seasons. Cernunnos, being the horn god, is the symbol, the visual symbol for Satan. But Cernunnos is not Moloch, nor is it Lucifer. It's a different deity. There's a plethora of deities, and they have very different goals from one another. There's some crossover. Sometimes they have similar attributes or portfolios, but very few of them are one-to-ones. Probably one of the only ones that I feel pretty comfortable saying is that Lucifer is Loki in Norse mythology, right? The trickster, he's trying to subvert things. You'll notice Loki cozies up to the truly evil gods, despite being an outcast from Asgard. And he cozies up to the giants and so forth. And he is key to defeating them during Ragnarok. If it was during Ragnarok, unless I'm getting that wrong. I think I'm getting that right. But anyways, Loki, the trickster character, or Coyote in Native American mythology, I feel fairly comfortable saying that that spirit is Lucifer through the eyes of different cultural milieu. Is that thing I was talking about at the beginning of the episode. I think Enki and Prometheus also hold that. But it's not always a cut and dried like one-to-one thing. Instead, it's rather like an aspect of that being. Whereas, another good example is, boy, I don't even like to say this being's name, but I need to think of his name for a second here to remember it. It seems to me that Baron Samedi, the Afro-Caribbean deity that's used in voodoo and hoodoo, it seems to me that he is an aspect of Lucifer. It seems to me that Loki is an aspect of Lucifer. When I use the term Lucifer, it's, to me, more complete. It's more complete. It also just happens to appeal to me personally, having been raised Catholic, and sort of having that Judeo-Christian, although really there's not a lot of, the Judeo-Christian thing is kind of a weird artificial construct. You might as well say Islamo-Christian, right? It doesn't really make sense. They're very distinct, separate things. But I grew up in that, I grew up Catholic, and so this framework fits for me structurally, and I understand the mythology of it, and so I feel comfortable using those terms, and I think it's fairly useful. So moving along, hand pink waving, Grand Duke Jew. I don't know how to say that name. Nice to see you too. I think you were just trying to wave. Library of Gnosis. Oh, hey, what's up, Tobias? What do you think about Graham Hancock? He seems to be most high oriented if I've ever seen one. It's funny. I think Graham's a good guy. I see him as more Luciferian, just in terms of like the kind of ideas he shares and so forth, and his desire to spread knowledge and all that kind of stuff. But that's just talking about a level of consciousness, so that's not really fair. I think that he tries to be most high connected, much in the same way that I try, and that I think most people who watch the show try. But the fact of the matter is if the template and standard is Yeshua, most of us aren't measuring up. So do I perceive him to be on the high end of Luciferian, low end of Most High, like myself, at a similar level of consciousness? Yes, I do, and I think he's a good person. I could be wrong about that, but I think he's a good person. And so, yeah, and I definitely like Graham Hancock and have tremendous respect for him. Hey, Heather, how's it going? Nice to see you. Hey, Ian, thoughts on Federation of Life? Many messages resonate with me, but seems like a movement that can be hijacked. Federation of Light, is that like the what's that thing called? The Galactic Federation or whatever? Is that one and the same? I don't know if you're still on, Heather. This was written about 30 minutes ago. But I would need more information on if that's the group I think of. It may just be that I'm not familiar with that group, and so I can't really respond in an informed way. But it's nice to see you, Heather. Let's see. Living free. Also, you said Lucifer wants to conquer the galaxy by using humans. What about the creatures that live in inner Earth? Wow. Yeah, and you guys asked some really great questions that like need entire episodes on their own to answer it. I am partial to the hollow earth theory, which might ring as funny to people who know that I am pretty opposed, to put it very mildly, to the flat earth theory. The thing is that we see tube toroids, the tube torus shape in nature all the time. And there's the curious thing of that ancient legend says that there's entrances at the poles. And there's also entrances in various different cave systems, in particular the Himalayas, the Andes, and Mount Shasta in California are all rumored to have entrances to the so-called inner earth, Shangri-La, Shambhala. I don't know if I believe in the full-blown inner earth that has like a sun at where the core of the earth is, and that the earth is completely hollow, and that it's like as hollow as a basketball is, but it has holes, and then the oceans go on the inside and then pop back out, and that where that churn point is the poles, right? It is odd to me. It makes sense to me that they wouldn't allow people to go over Antarctica if there is the persistent rumors of ancient ruins there, or alien ships, or even the Nazis rule Antarctica, right? All of those are good reasons why they wouldn't allow people to fly over Antarctica, and you will be stopped by military jets if you try, apparently. What's far stranger to me is that they won't allow you to fly over the North Pole, which ostensibly has nothing but maybe some icebergs over it. I mean, it's a continent, Antarctica. So there's all kinds of different things. I mean, there could just be like tons of gold lying on the ground or something like that, something super mundane that they don't want people to know about. It crash the price of gold or something. You know what I mean? Like there could be a very banal explanation for Antarctica, or more sexy and exotic, like ancient ruins, like alien spacecraft, like in X-Files and The Thing, right? But why would they not allow people to go over the North Pole, which is ice free some percentage of the year, I think, and like there should just be nothing there, but you will be intercepted by military jets if you try and fly over the North Pole. Why? It makes me wonder. So if there are creatures that live in the inner earth, I don't know how they factor into that. I mean, are they human? That's a question I have. Imagine that there is an inner earth. I certainly think there's honeycombed earth, by which I mean things like tunnels that go from the Himalayas to roughly where the Hopi are. And there's an exit someplace where the Hopi live down in the Southwest desert. I think there are tunnel systems like that. I had someone tell me that there is Walter Bosley talked about that he heard stories that there's underwater tunnels that go pretty deep into the United States, that there's entrances on the coast. I had a friend tell me something that there was an entrance that was seen, and that it has weird like Romanesque statues on either side of the entrance, which is probably a modern day creation where someone's just having a lark, or maybe they're doing it for esoteric purposes. But that doesn't mean the tunnel is new. The tunnel itself could be quite ancient. I'm certain that we have carved vast tunnels under the United States like Cynthia Schneider, her husband Phil, in that interview that I had, he claimed that, they had maglev trains that went from the East Coast to the West Coast in these underground tunnels. I think they do have pretty much that level of tunnels, and Catherine Austin Fitts has said that. So it stands to reason that ancients would have done similar things, especially high-tech ancients, Lemuria, Atlantis, Mu, Hyperborea, stuff like that, that they too might have created these tunnel systems, especially if Randall Carlson's theory about bombardment from, like comet fragments when we move through certain sections of the galaxy. As we go around the spiral arm of the galaxy, we move through sections where there's a particularly high volume of asteroids, comets, whatever, and that we tend to get bombarded along the way, which is, interestingly, from an astrological perspective, it's on the transitional places when you move into any of the fixed signs, including, unfortunately, as we move into the age of Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, Scorpio, is where almost all these incredible extinction level events that would have destroyed civilization that Randall Carlson has plotted out. So if there is periodic bombardment, and the ancients were aware of this, which there's certain clues towards that, then, like there's that, not in Göbekli Tepe, but in Cappadocia, they found that vast underground city in Turkey. Imagine that on steroids, to where it's not just like a small underground city, but imagine that an entire civilization spent 1,000 years or more hollowing out during the last bombardment at the end of the Golden Age, when Atlantis sank beneath the waves from potentially a bombardment, the Younger Dryas impact, and that they just never stopped. They just stayed down there and kept drilling away and kept making tunnel systems. Or maybe they even started doing that like a previous cycle ago, right? That they started doing this 30, 40, 50,000 years ago. They could have a civilization down there that makes ours look like trash. I've heard people theorize that that's what people are seeing with the UFOs. It's high-tech humans that live in the inner Earth. There's certainly enough persistent rumors and myths about honeycombed Earth or inner Earth, Agartha, Shambhala, Shangri-La, right? I forget what they call the one that's supposedly that there's an entrance down there in the Mount Shasta. There's a name for that civilization there. There were some cool books made in the 70s. There was a lot of revelation in the 70s. I don't know what it was about that decade, but tons of revelation that came out during that time period. More stuff came out during the 70s, just about ever. It's kind of wild if you look at movies from back then, sci-fi from back then, conspiracy theory books from back then. Like, so much of it is just money. It's kind of amazing. But like, my answer is it's too speculative, and I haven't heard something specific about it, but that sure would be interesting if there is some kind of persistent civilization in the honeycomb Earth. The rumor is that the 7 immortal sages, who are the non-dual masters who guide Earth's spiritual evolution, that they live up in Shangri-La, Shambhala, and some cave system there underneath the Himalayas. That rings true to me. So honeycomb Earth, yes, I'm definitely a believer in that. I feel basically certain about that. Hollow Earth, like the hardcore hollow Earth with like a sun in the middle, or like a full-blown mega civilization, possibly of another species in the Earth. I'm open to it, but I need to see more evidence of that. I will say that second theory is far more believable to me and makes more sense to me than flat Earth by light years. It's just not close. And in fact, I think flat Earth is in part because I think hollow Earth might have started to really start to pop around now if it hadn't been for flat Earth coming down and everyone getting obsessed with that. All right. And that it could be a psyop to distract from that. I mean, if you want to believe that UFOs come from the inner Earth and maybe the inner Earth runs everything, well then, gosh, that would be a great reason to have a flat Earth psyops. So truther said, and I am going to need to wrap it up here soon, folks. Oh, wow. Wow, I have a ton more messages, although one of them looks maybe ranty. What will happen to people that are black magicians but not on an elite level? For example, the people that work with local necromantic spirits in Africa. Oh, well, I think most of those people will end up not making it through the upcoming bottleneck event, and that their souls will probably reincarnate somewhere in the Kali Yuga, because we don't things don't move in linear time, or they might reincarnate in the next Kali Yuga or the former Kali Yuga. They would probably just almost certainly reincarnate in a Kali Yuga until they stop doing that shit. Yeah, sorry to have a brief answer on that. I'm going to have to just make it a little briefer here. How do Luciferian deal with safe and effective medical interventions? I have a sense for the Malakan approach. Thanks, Ian. I'm not sure I understand that question. If you mean specifically that one, do you mean like how do they avoid it the same way anyone else would, just refuse it, and like you probably might have to lose your job or not be willing to travel or whatever, depending on your jurisdiction. You know, it's not easy. I was in a lucky position of I was, you know, doing the work I do. I don't have to answer to anyone, so I didn't have to take it. You know, praise be the Most High. My family was just kind of divinely protected. I'm just not sure I understand the question, Devin. If you want to rephrase it, I would love to answer it. I'm just not sure I understand it, so I can't really answer it without understanding it. So Rocket 36 says, when Jesus said Father in heaven, do you think he was referring to the monad in heaven being a state of consciousness? That's really interesting. I think that he was referring to the Most High. He even used the term the Most High and Father in heaven. He uses both. I think that often Jesus was trying to, this is just my opinion, that Jesus was trying to demonstrate us how to be in a golden age state of consciousness, and that he was offering a pure emanation and a pure transmission of that super high level consciousness. I think that he was trained in legacy Most High mystery schools in Egypt, and also in Pakistan, Tibet, India, right? That they were the deeply hidden Most High affiliated mystery schools. And I noticed he went east, right? He went to the source. It really does seem like the Himalayas are the emanation of all the mystery schools, actually, because the non-dual ones come from there. And non-duality, which in a certain sense, the concept of the monad is non-duality, you know, the Kabbalistic version of it, that does seem to be the ultimate truth, right? That the void, that the unmanifest and the manifest are ultimately one and the same, and that there is no duality. There's not even one, because it is one, but because there is no two, there cannot be a one. So it's prior to one, right? And that Advaita Vedanta is, in my opinion, the purest teaching about that. And in particular, the great sage Ramana Maharshi of India has probably elucidated that religion. Another person I really like is Nisargadatta Maharaj. That shelf, it's backwards. That shelf up there is all non-dual type texts. And that right there, those two right there, one of them's lost its cover. It's I think it's I Am That. Is that right? Yeah, I Am That by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj is the greatest. It's he and the teachings of Ramana Maharshi are the two sages that I most align with. I used to be very into non-dualism, and I've actually been feeling somewhat of a call towards it again, but I just feel it's really important at this time to be a countervailing energy to the Molochians in particular, and to make sure that Moloch's thrown back into the pit. But I wouldn't be surprised if in my old age, as much as I love the Most High in the angelic realms, if I instead strive for an escape from the wheel of samsara. I don't know. I do really love it here. I do really love good humans, and I love the earth. And I've done a lot of white magic at this point that would make it rather difficult for me to not reincarnate. I would have to burn up a lot of karma, good karma, but still a lot of karma that is going to root me to the wheel of samsara. That's one of the issues, is that when you do magic, you are saying, I wish to co-create in creation in a very serious way, at a very fundamental level. You accrue a lot of karma for that. If you're doing good works, then you'll reincarnate with good karma, but you're going to reincarnate. And if you do black magic, well, then woe be to you and your soul. Like it's, you can come back from it. I may have him on someday, and I'm curious about people's opinion. There's a man I know who was a warlock for like 25 years, and he has since completely, he's completely abandoned it. And he actually got kicked out of a lot of like the black magic left-hand circles that I knew a lot of those people because of my ex, who was very much in that milieu. And that's how I've gotten a lot of the information I have about the dark side, is I spoke to the people directly, not the high-ranking people who rule the world, but their reflections, as above, so below, the JV squad, right? Not even JV, more like I was talking to like the 5th grade basketball team instead of, you know, the NBA level, right? But they both were talking basketball, and I learned a lot about the philosophy and the state of mind and the behaviors of these people who were either Luciferian or more in that Molochian. And there was a guy who was very much, he wasn't harming kids or anything, but he was into working with the really dark clephotic spirits constantly for like 20 to 25 years, and he was teaching people how to do it. And he states, he calls them the Empyrean, Empyrean. That is his term for the celestials or the angels. And he was one day, and this happened while I knew him, after he met me, which I can't help but wonder if he and I talking, and because I have Pluto on my ascendant, and that has a very transformative effect on people. And he had never really talked to a white magician before that I know of. I might be like hyping myself up a little bit too much here, and I you know, should be careful, because it probably isn't me. Maybe just because the angels that are around me by the grace of the Most High. He said that angels then came to him and said, we're giving you one last chance, or you're going to be damned to hell, and until your soul learns of the grievous error that is made in teaching people this black magic. And he saw what a huge negative effect he had on everyone that he had taught this, and he has since sincerely repented. But his experience of the angels is pretty significantly different from mine, in the sense that they always come to him like kind of angry, like you need to shape the fuck up and you need to get your shit together right now. And they're very harsh with him and don't allow him to make even minor mistakes, or they're on him and threaten him. And that's not my experience of the angels at all. But of course, I didn't, for 25 years, not dabble in, but infuse my soul with black magic the way he did. And so I believe he is sincerely trying to repent. And I've thought about having him on my show because he really wants to share that story. I just am not sure, because he still is like in kind of an early stage of spiritual magical recovery. But he does show that redemption is possible for anyone. And I do like that part of things. And I do admire him for attempting to rectify his life after being in such a dark place for so long. So just like I need to take a sip here. Okay, I am going to need to wrap it up in probably the next 10 minutes. So Josh said, who would be the aspect of Enlil? Enlil to me is Moloch, most likely, but it's not like a one-to-one thing. I also think there's aspects of Enlil that would go on to become Yahweh and Jehovah. That's why I say that is not the that's not the Most High, and not to make that mistake. But it's very tricky and nuanced. It's just not straightforward. It's not just a one-to-one thing. That's what I've been trying to say in this episode, is that you have to be really careful when you translate these deities from one religion or cultural group to another. It just isn't one-to-one. I've noticed, for example, that, and I need to be careful about this, the triplicity that they have in the Vedic tradition, right, of Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer, does kind of equate to some degree with Brahma and is the Most High. That's the closest one. Shiva to Moloch isn't a very good match, other than the destructive part of it, and the fact that Moloch the mind, the Western mind, and the repugnant nature of like the harm of children and stuff like that wants to reject Moloch as though it has no purpose in the function of the universe, and that's not actually true. Obviously, I do not care for that being at all. But again, it goes through this cultural lens and screening that is beyond, has an attitude of beyond good and evil that creates a very different quality to that destructive thing. So then it becomes more like the destruction of the spring floods that then, you know, after the winter snow has melted, that then paves the way for the spring. It's not a perfect match. And probably the one that's almost the weirdest of those three is Vishnu, the preserver, as Lucifer would be a real reach. And the only way I can really justify that is that indeed Lucifer is who prevents Moloch from destroying everything. The Most High does not do that. It is the Luciferian impulse that prevents total destruction by Moloch. I know that's hard to wrap one's mind around, especially if you come from a Christian background. But according to what the angels have told me and a lot of esoteric research over the years, that appears to be true. For what it's worth, and again, if it doesn't resonate with you, you can just move on. Are the reptiles on control? Gosh, that's a whole nother layer, the whole extraterrestrial phenomenon. It doesn't fit neatly into the Luciferian, Molochian, Most High thing at all, because they're a third party. They're outside of the Earth realm, but they have definitely been manipulating things here. That is actually shockingly and weirdly true. They had a tremendous deal of influence, but they left. They left 2 years ago, actually. They're on their way back, but they left because they were scared by a greater, more dangerous group of aliens that had come here. And the earthbound deities are very alarmed and upset about the interference by non-earthbound species. And so there are also, like, we have planetary deities. Apparently there's also galactic level deities, and there's deities above that. There's several layers of deities between like Most High versus Lucifer, whatever. Like Most High is the creative force for Earth, for the Earth realm. The Most High is the creative force here. Moloch is the destructive force here. Lucifer is the force that brings the tide of change moving towards one of those poles or the other, the evolutionary impulse. Lucifer's off the planet, but the Most High and Moloch are not. They're both very anchored to this world somehow. I don't really understand this. This is just what's been shown to me, and I'm just sharing it. The extraterrestrials are off the planet, so they don't have any allegiance to, nor are they bound by the rules of our planet. They're bound by a different set of rules because they've gone up and they've left their solar system. I don't really know what those rules are. There's apparently some kind of rules there, spiritual rules, I mean, and I don't really know them. I don't know how that works. I don't really know. All I know is that I was shown in a very intense vision that a much greater evil had come here, a much higher civilization than the reptilians, which are really only like kind of like a couple stages of technologically beyond where we are. They're not super way beyond where we are. They're pretty far, but we're catching up with them rapidly. This other group came a few years ago, and they're a much greater predatory parasitic group that harvests spiritual energy, apparently. And they came quite a while ago, but they were doing something that scared the reptilians away. They were doing something that caused the reptilians to leave. This stuff is so weird, it just makes me sound even crazier than everything else on this channel I talk about, so I hesitate to talk about it. But they were scared by this greater, more powerful civilization, which in turn was scared by an even greater intergalactic species that came here and scared off that then additional party that had scared off the reptilians. That group seems to be neutral, or is at a level of power that it's neutral in the same way that an ant would see humans as neutral, because it's so far beyond it's so far beyond like the ken of the ant that the ant can't understand this motivation of this ultra powerful being. In a similar way, these beings that appeared to me as giant sort of bronze or brass eye ships that were very large, when they came, it caused this greater parasite, horrible mind control that made the reptilians look reasonable. That species, which I don't know what they're called, were driven off, and the reptilians left around that time. They're apparently on their way back to Earth, but they left, and it caused a big political uproar among the reptilians, because they have sort of a caste system around like soldiers and scientific class. It's very similar, actually, interestingly, to the Hindu caste system. It's almost exactly the same, actually, which makes me wonder if the one didn't precede the other. But the reptilians have had such a long presence on Earth, apparently, that they sort of started to have a take on certain Earth-like qualities and vice versa, that they were very impactful. I don't know. I don't know what to think about the whole extraterrestrial thing. I feel uncomfortable talking about it. That did come to me a few years ago, and I haven't really had any interaction with or looked into the sort of ET presence. I will say this about ET, since my last thought on it. If there's one group to not channel, they would be in order of don't do it, would go like this. It would go, ETs, number one, do not channel them. Jinn, do not channel them. And then like qliphothic spirits, right? Like the named dark spirits that are in the qliphoth, the opposite of the tree of life, the dark Kabbalah, right? Notice that I recommend that the demons are more friendly, so to speak, than the ETs. That is because the demons require humans to some degree in order to function, and their functioning is not symbiotic, it's closer to parasitic, but they require humans in order to achieve what they want, and they're interested in what occurs on Earth, and they're bound to it. And they will sometimes advance human interests that parallel their interests. The Jinn, if you were to run into a blue Jinn, that would be great, which are friendly. Jinn are free-willed beings that are plasma-based rather than light-based like angels, or element of earth-based like humans, right? Clay, we were made with clay, and then they breathe life into us. And they're free-willed beings, unlike angels, which do not have free will. Angels don't have free will. They function as a manifestation of the hierarchy of the Most High. But the Jinn are plasma-based beings that, according to the Quran, were here prior to us, and they were defeated by the angels in something like 10,000-year war. They're virtually immortal. They live for many thousands of years, and they only reproduce and only have one offspring. And they, and this is based on a book I read about the Jinn. And some other sources, but that's the primary one. I can't remember the name of this book right off the top of my head, but they had compiled all sorts of information about the Jinn. Because they're free will beings, there's good ones, there's neutral ones, and they're bad ones. So the blue ones are good, and they apparently are visually blue. But you'll basically never see them because they don't want to interact with us. They just want to do their studies, their magic, their meditation, their creating their civilization. They're like, well, the Most High kicked us off Earth, so we're just going to accept it. They're basically honoring natural law. Then there's green Jinn, which are young Jinn, right? Maybe only a few hundred years old or whatever. They're quite young, and they tend to be very mischievous, and they love playing tricks on humans, and they love doing things. A lot of when people think they're dealing with a poltergeist, it's actually one of these Jinn that are an extra dimensional being in addition to being plasma based. And so they can do things like manipulate objects to some degree. They are okay, but they tend to be tricksters to some degree, or to a large degree. But if you mess with them, then their parents might come and be very angry, and that would go badly for you. But then there's red Jinn. And by far the most common interaction humans have with Jinn are red Jinn. And red Jinn hate us. and they want to destroy us, and they want to wipe us out, and they want to take the earth back over. In fact, there's some people who theorize, including the authors of this book, that the human problems, you know how we all get that sense that at the highest levels, there's a non-human intelligence that's trying to grind humans down, right? I'm convinced it's Moloch and so forth, but there is a theory that this author or pair of authors posit, which is that it's actually the jinn trying to reconquer the earth. What I will say is avoid jinn at all costs. They're actually more hateful towards human than even demons. But even jinn have some degree of interest in the earth itself. Aliens, they have a completely different ethos. They have a completely different value system. And if the earth blew up, how would that impact Alpha Centauri? It wouldn't. They don't care. They might be like, oh, those poor humans, the same way a parent seeing a kid kick over an anthill might go, oh, that's too bad you kicked over that anthill. You shouldn't have done that. Those poor ants. So why don't you think about the ants a little bit, right? They, like, even the benevolent ETs, like, they would just be like, oh, would have been nice to save the humans. Oh, well, moving right along, right? They don't have any skin in the game. Whereas even the jinn have some amount of skin in the game, and the demons actually have a fair amount of skin in the game. Moloch does the weird take his ball and go home thing at the end of the Kali Yuga, where he wants to like kind of kill us all if we won't do what he wants. But most of the other demons are far more reasonable than that, while still being evil and manipulative. But they require humans. They require humans for their existence. And so they will, with the exception of Moloch and a couple of his lieutenants, as a general rule, they don't seek the total destruction of humans in quite the same way that the jinn do, or especially like the nasty aliens. And so I would just say, you know, people think, you know, I'm kind of partial to the Pleiadians. I think that my soul like originates there. But I wouldn't trust them because they're very political, ETs are. They're very political, and they're playing like, you know, people talk about Trump playing 4D chess. They're playing like 40D chess. They're doing, and they're involved in galactic politics, and it's just, it's beyond our ability to understand, pretty much. And it's got all the nuance of human politics, but if all humans had a 500 IQ or whatever. So just stay away from aliens. That's my thought on that. Everything is a psyop. Well, to some degree. Can a person attain nirvana or enlightenment without being most highlighted? Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Even an evil person can step out of the wheel of samsara in an instant with the correct realization. In fact, some people on the left-hand path are sincerely trying to have that goal of being obliterated by the black sun and attaining oneness that way. And it's possible. There's certain black tantra practices in India that are designed to do exactly that. I don't think that that's a pleasant way to go about it. I don't think that that's a wise way to go about it, because let's say you're most high aligned but seeking nirvana. If it goes wrong, well, you just were a pretty good person and got some good karma. If you try doing the weird like black tantra stuff, and I'm not talking about sex, I'm talking about that one. There's a specific cult over there in India that does all kinds of crazy stuff, eats corpses and like all sorts of like insane shit. And they kind of almost have a similar outlook, but it's through the Indian cultural lens, so it just has a different flavor to it. But they have somewhat of a similar mindset to the Sabbatian Frankism I mentioned earlier, of like, we've got to obliterate any kind of custom. They want to free themselves of attachment by inverting or just subverting or just saying fuck you to any kind of like cultural moray to kind of an insane degree. But I do think it is possible. But again, you have to have that non-dual outlook, which is very difficult for most Western people to understand. I was pretty steeped in non-dualism for a while, so it makes sense to me and I understand it. But most people will find it repugnant to even consider. And so, yes, I think you can. I just think that it's not wise to do anything other than through like a more loving, harmonious version of seeking out the non-dual enlightenment, which is 12th house, by the way. Whereas most of the stuff on this channel, 12th house astrologically is non-dual transcendent spirituality, whereas 8th house astrology is much more mysticism, and that's what I tend to be steeped in and what this channel talks about more. Read the navigator who passed the ice wall now. Oh no, well, dude, if you're going to start going there. Okay. All right. We're going to move and ignore that one. Hey, Alex Manning, how's it going? And then Preco, whoever that is, says, how do Molochians coexist with most high people if they're energetically completely opposed in the Vatican, for example? I don't think there's a lot of most high people in the Vatican. It's the short answer on that. And Molochians try and destroy most high energy whenever they come across it. So it usually requires most high people to hide their nature from the Molochians, because if they reveal it and proclaim it publicly, they will usually end up getting destroyed by the Molochians one way or another, because the Molochians have an intense desire to destroy most high energy when they come across it, hence what they did to Jesus. All right. Oh my God. Okay, this guy needs to be blocked. Now that I see that, ban user and delete their comments. Boom. Started saying anti-Semitic stuff, calling me a clown. That is not something I tolerate on the channel. And they were flat earther. People are like, Ian, why do you harp on flat earthers so much? Well, if you had dealt with as much abuse as I have from flat earthers, and also as an astrologer just knew it was utterly false, you might also not have a super high tolerance of flat earthers. All right, let's see, wake up. Has angels told you which is the least corrupted religion on earth right now, if there is such a thing? No, they haven't. As far as Christianity goes, it seems like Russian Greek Orthodox are more pure. I think I'm not super familiar with either of those. I'm not super familiar with the Coptics, but those three intuitively all feel a lot cleaner and clearer. But I don't know enough to make a good answer on that. So no, I have not heard. I haven't heard I haven't asked the angels that or heard an answer about that. Yeah, I mean, I think that the sad truth is that by and large, most religions, even including most Buddhist sects, are pretty corrupted at this point. I do think there's a general rule Buddhism is better than the Abrahamic faiths. I used to think Hinduism was better. Hinduism has kind of taken on kind of an ugly turn. Some of the nationalist Hindu stuff has taken on some ugliness past few decades. Obviously, the Abrahamic faiths have all been pretty corrupted, even from the get-go. The only group that I feel super like, but even those groups have tons of people who are spiritually bypassing and very awful, is sort of like the non-dual stuff I talk about. That's sort of the thing that I'm most attracted to, is Advaita Vedanta, but that's not really most high aligned. That's more transcendent non-dualism. I think there's probably specific small Christian sects here and there, and monasteries and nunneries in particular, that are probably quite beautiful. I don't know which ones they are. I'm interested in and curious about something called the Great Schema, which is this the extreme hardcore ultra orthodox monks, Russian monks. I just recently learned a little bit about them. I think it was actually Tobias, who was on earlier, who brought it to my attention. I don't really know much about it. Oh no, actually it was Philip Jimenez, who was on the Black Nobility series. He brought my attention to the Great Schema people. I'd never actually even heard of them before. I intuitively felt coming across them that they were particularly pure. I guess they sometimes do miracles and stuff, supposedly. All right, I am going to have to wrap up soon here, people. This has gone quite long and strong. I wonder where Kissinger is now. Do you really wonder? I do think he was, sadly, the adult in the room, which is not praising of Kissinger. It is a testament to how batshit fucking insane people have come, that Kissinger was like, whoa, I may have committed horrible genocide in Cambodia and carpet bombed the Cambodians and led directly to the Khmer Rouge, millions dead. And I may have done this evil thing and that evil thing and 100 other evil things. And I think I forgot another 100 evil things I did. You guys need to freaking pump the brakes a little bit on the evil. Like he wanted them to not fight with Russia and Ukraine. He has told Israel they need to like chill out a little bit on the Palestinians that they don't want to be destroyed. Like Kissinger weirdly had become sort of a voice of reason the past 10 years. I don't think it's that Kissinger had suddenly become good. I think it's that things had gotten so fucking insane in the halls of power that even Kissinger was appalled. It reminds me of that story of Ashcroft, who helped pass the Patriot Act and stuff. Alberto Gonzalez and Cheney, I think, visited Ashcroft in the hospital room, and they brought him some document to sign. Nobody knows what this document was, but even Ashcroft, who was on his deathbed, was like, I am not signing that. That's way too evil. And I'm just like, God, how evil was that? So I think it's a similar thing of like where Kissinger just was like the same amount of evil he'd always been, but he lived long enough to become not the villain anymore. That doesn't mean he wasn't a villain. So he is a villain. Let me be clear about that. Kissinger's horrible. And like, if there is a hell, he's definitely there. But it's terrifying to me that Kissinger had been a voice of restraint in the halls of power the past, especially 6 years or so. That is just really, really the most damning thing I could say about the halls of power right now. Truther. Can even the darkest Malakan go to heaven if he repents to Jesus? It's not that simple. That is, in my opinion, a trash thing that has come along much later that lets people get out of jail free on their deathbed or whatever and not actually have to do any work and not actually have to love thy neighbor as thyself and not actually have to be a good human being on this earth. Do I think someone can repent and begin the process of their soul's redemption? Yes, absolutely. I talked about that earlier with that warlock guy. He wasn't a Molochian, but he had been doing very dark magic for a very long time. Yes, you can repent, but I tell you something. He tried to repent, didn't work. He can see angels, unlike most people. Didn't work. Not good enough. Not good enough. And it's one of the things that I cannot stand about Christianity is this idea that you can just be Joel Osteen and just exploit all these people, treat them like shit, cheat on your wife, maybe harm some children, do whatever you want. And then you're like, oh, what's that, doc? I have 2 minutes to live. Oh, I sincerely repent now. Like, why would you be a good person if you could do that? It's just part of the whole mind control nonsense that's been layered on top of Christianity. Yes, if someone truly, truly repents and they truly, truly work towards becoming a good person, even if they are not, like they've done really bad stuff in their life. Yes, I believe in redemption. The angels have told me that even the lowest person can have access to the 72 Shem angels that are closest to us. They'll eventually lose contact with the archangels. It's very hard to lose contact even with the archangels. You have to be profoundly evil to lose contact with them. But they always leave the door open with angels. But let me tell you something. It is a long and difficult road to have that level, to have like true redemption, meaning that you truly integrate and heal all your shadow and you truly move into a full most high vibration. It's a road I'm still on. I am still working on it. I am still trying to become a better human being, and I have to do it any day. And I am way light years beyond the darkest Molochian. And it's like people want things to be easy. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. You have to put effort in, not 10% on the plate once a week, and then you go back to hitting people over the head with an economic cudgel for the other 6 days of the week and shitting on people. But, oh, I gave 10% to the collection plate and now everything's fine. All is forgiven. That's that Catholic indulgences thing, right? They eventually took this idea that you're posting here and they made it literally of, for a certain fee, we will forgive you of any of your sin. They were called indulgences in the Catholic Church back in the 1500s. And it was part of why Martin Luther rebelled against the Catholic Church, because he found that so abhorrent. And I wholeheartedly agree. So yes, if someone makes a sincere effort to redeem themselves, but it's going to require a lot of good works. It's going to require a lot of effort. And it's not just something you can do a deathbed repentance and call it good. You are going to have to, one way or the other, karmically pay for what you've done. Unless you have that total breakthrough enlightenment moment, and you suddenly become totally enlightened in an instant. But that's the rarest spiritual thing to happen for humans. It basically never happens. It's super rare for a fairly neutral to good person, like say Eckhart Tolle, right, claims that this happened and seems true, although he's friends with Oprah. So then you wonder, is he trying to redeem Oprah? Is he like, you know, whatever. I saw him once live in person. He seemed to be the real deal to me. He claims to just have had a moment of enlightenment, but he was a pretty good person before that. I mean, he wasn't like a great person. He was just some nervous, nerdy guy in college or whatever when it happened to him. And there's a few other people who've had it happen, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare that that happens, as in, you know, 1 in a couple 10 million, right? But it's now that big of a gulf to you're someone super evil and you have that moment of total revelation where you truly see it. It's extremely rare, right? Even though I mentioned earlier, there's that Tantra group in India that tries to do exactly that. It's just like, just frickin' put some effort in once in a while, people. Not you, truther, but I just mean like this idea that you can just snap your fingers without effort and be absolved of your sins is kind of like, I mean, why do people want that? Because they want to do all the sinning up until they don't anymore, right? I mean, that's what it's really about. I'm not saying you're that way, truther. I'm just saying this idea of like the deathbed confession, everything's fine now because you just said, hey, I like Jesus now. And people are like, oh my God, did you give 10% in the plate? Oh, right. Here's your official get out of jail free card. Like that's like, Jesus Christ, like, come on. That is not where, that's not what he came to teach us at all. ENLO is an acronym name for the solar radar, or whatever the official solar radar is too. Notice that when I watch Suspicious Observers. Huh. Wow, that is interesting. I had not heard that. I hear ENLO is a bit of a tool. Yes, indeed. Okay. Wow. This just goes on and on. There's a lot here, guys. I don't think I'm just going to be able to hit this all. What deity should we call to protect us against powerful extraterrestrials? So the nice thing is that once they touch down here on Earth and get like closer in, now they're under our rules. They have weird technology shit they can do that magic doesn't interface with well, much the way that magic doesn't interface well with regular technology, right? You try and use magic on a guy pointing a gun, probably you're just going to get shot, right? But once they come here, once they come here, then, you know, just call on the archangels and they'll help you. Call on Archangel Michael. That works. That's pretty much a panacea. Call on Archangel Michael. If you're higher, then you can if you're at a higher vibration, the powers of the Ophanim are even better, but everyone can call on Archangel Michael. Well, thank you, Rebel, for truth. Yeah, I mean, I know I'm not either, but I've certainly had very weird experiences that's difficult for most people to do. So all black magicians are going to get punished in hell? That's scary. No, if you repent, you're going to be able to come out of it. And hell, the way I understand it, is simply that your soul goes to a place. It has to recognize how far it strayed from natural law. You kind of get that clockwork orange. You have to witness everything you did and its impact on everyone for a long period of time until you work through all of those horrible things that you did, and then you're freed of it eventually, and then you reincarnate. That's hell, right? It's not eternal. It's not forever. You're not just tortured forever. But it kind of feels like torture when you have to go back and watch that time that you pushed that kid down at school, and then you find out that years later that kid became increasingly depressed from being bullying and then committed suicide. You have to sit with that. That's pretty intense. You know what I mean? Except for it's way beyond that because you've actively done negative things with the black magic. That's not to say that just because you've done black magic, your soul is automatically condemned with no escape. It just means that when you do any form of magic, it virtually guarantees that you will reincarnate here. So you better like it here, which I do. If you do white magic, it means that you will probably be born into a more prosperous family or other good karmas. And if you do black magic, you'll reincarnate here, and you're going to have to work through the same way you did during that soul thing where your soul has to do it. You then have to do it in the physical plane as well. So it's like not doing homework for the entirety of high school And then like you think you're going to graduate and they go, well, you haven't done any homework for 4 years. Better hit the books, kid, because you have to do all of that before you get out of here. That's what happens. So it's not nearly as horrible as what you're saying, in the sense of it's not the Christian idea of burning in a pit forever and being sodomized by demons or whatever, right? There may be elements of that experience in that period in between incarnations where you have to really come to grips with what you did and how much you missed the mark, which is what sin means originally, is to miss the mark. And to miss the mark is basically the degree to which you went against natural law. Is the best way of putting it. Okay, I respect and appreciate you. Thank you for telling the truth. Do not be scared. Do not worried about being scared. Tell the truth. Thanks, man. What is next to happen here on Earth? When is it going to free us? Oh, man. Yeah. Yes, you can always free yourself and just, doing your inner work, right? Coming to grips with where you've erred and trying to correct it in an honest way and integrity. I mean, that's what I do, is I help people with spiritual guidance. I haven't completely, by any means, I'm not enlightened. I'm not some perfect avatar of the Most High the way Yeshua was. I strive and hope to move in that direction to where I can get to that point to where I can be acting at that level. I've done a lot of work. I had a tremendous amount of abuse and trauma that I've healed through, but I didn't, I wouldn't put myself on the level of some of these very spiritually elevated people. I'm just someone who has had some mystical experiences that I've been directed by the angels to share with people in order to help them do exactly that, to free themselves. So it's very possible. And I talk about some of the tools and methods to do that. It's now 8 o'clock where I am, which means that I've been doing this for about, I guess I have an exact timer, 2.5 hours. So I'm just going to real quick and just see ones that are quick and skip through. Birds eat reptiles. And once a chicken, so a garden snake, strand spaghetti. Swore to never eat their eggs again, but eventually I did. That's funny. Let's see here. Do you think Buddhism is Luciferian because it's about self-enlightenment? No, it's non-dual. It's beyond good and evil. One of the things I struggle with sometimes is I feel this overwhelming urge, especially since I work with the angels, and I've basically agreed that I will work with the angels, and the angels are political in a certain sense too. It's just that their goals happen to overlap with my goals, which is that I want to see a more harmonious, loving planet, and that's what they want. And they're very powerful, and working with them, I can have miraculous results in helping my fellow humans. I used to try and do that in a very material way, being a social worker and all this stuff, and now I try and do it in a spiritual way. But no, the Buddhists aren't Luciferian at all, because if you understand Buddhism, it's about freeing yourself from ego. Luciferianism is about diving balls deep into your ego, not a very arrested development, very stunted ego like the Molochians have, that's very much just stuck in the first, barely into the second chakra, but a much more elevated ego of Luciferianism, right? The Malakans are stuck in a very low, like first and second chakra level of ego, and the Luciferians are higher than that. They're certainly in the third, and they also are in the third eye. They're kind of they're detached. Their crown chakra is not firing super well. Their third eye is often wide the fuck open, throat chakra, right? But where they struggle is with the crown chakra and the heart chakra, right? They lack wisdom. They're very cerebral and intelligent, but they lack wisdom. But Buddhism is beyond any of that. It's saying free yourself from the wheel of samsara. Recognize that we live in a non-dual universe. That's why I talk about these three groups, and then I say there's also a fourth group, but it's difficult to cognize for people in the West, and it's the non-dual group. It's the smallest by far of the groups. It's very potent, but it's the smallest. And most people who are non-dual inclined choose to not reincarnate here, and their goal is to get out of it's the whatever the opposite of Mahayana Buddhism is. It's the small vehicle. They just want to attain enlightenment and get the fuck out, right? Which is actually what the Buddha told people to do. He said, don't do this Mahayana thing like me. don't become enlightened and come back to pull people over to enlightenment. Instead, once you've hit it, just don't talk about it with anyone, go up on the mountain, leave your body, don't reincarnate. So no, it's not Luciferian at all. Scorpion, Raptor, Phoenix, reptiles hate, fear those the most in that order of ascension. Interesting. It's funny because you're talking about the transition from Scorpio. The first part of Scorpio is the scorpion that goes down the underworld, and then it comes up and it becomes the eagle. The eagle is often shown as the ancient form of Scorpio. And then I don't know if the Phoenix relates to Oificus, the serpent holder, which is the one between Sagittarius and Scorpio, but that's interesting. That's just an interesting, like, symbolic progression. Okay, I like Bombay Gin. Okay. Evening. Thank you for the info. I'm stuck on if we're in a giant recursive Russian nesting doll in a way loop. Is this place to sort of pick and choose adventure for our own personal growth? Yeah, it's exactly what it is. I mean, we're here to spiritually evolve, and the Earth is just a very specific. It's just a very specific environment for souls to grow. It's one of the best in the galaxy, apparently, for spiritual growth. It's also the hardest. Like, this is Earth, may be the hardest in the galaxy planet to be on in terms of intensity for spiritual growth, especially during Kali Yuga. So that implies that all of us here in this channel, when we decided to boot up the video game of life, we said, you know what, fuck it, we're going ultra hardcore giga impossible mode. I'm doing Earth. What? Wait, on Kali Yuga, because I like an extra super duper retarded level challenge. So yeah. Gin up 3 olives, only gin. Yeah, not that kind of gin. DJIN. Protestant doctrine of salvation through faith alone, not through works, is a bit lame. Plus, James, Jesus' brother, says in the Bible that's not possible. Yeah, I like James. What are your thoughts on Gnostic Christianity? I have very mixed feelings about it. There's a sort of more beautiful version of Gnostic Christianity, and then some Gnosticism can dip into the really dark Gnosticism, which then turns into things like Sabbatian Frankism and Moloch worship, worshiping the evil version of the demiurge. I think Gnostic Christianity, where you're attempting to connect with, where you're trying to connect through God directly through your own experience, I think that's beautiful. And I think it can be really beautiful that you're going within and that you're finding, that Godhead or that Atman that exists with every living being, and even all objects have it. It's direct connection to ultimate creator, which is the first layer is the Most High, but then there's a layer I don't know about anyways, that's the galactic level. But then there's the ultimate creator, which is beyond good and evil. And that is the ultimate creator, and that the Atman or Godhead within us, we can connect to it through that. I mean, it's considered blasphemy according to Christians, but most things I say on this channel are, I guess. And yet I would say that I do try. I fail. Every day I fail, unfortunately. That's the truth. But I do try and model my behavior and my way of treating my human beings. Probably my highest role model is Yeshua, Jesus. I just don't call myself Christian because I think that Christian implies that you think Jesus alone gives you salvation, and I do not believe that's true. I believe that Jesus is a totally viable route to salvation and to connection with the Most High. I also think he's the best ever messenger there's been from the Most High. That we know of, right? There might be other people, we just don't have good records. I think that we only have fragments of his teachings, and you can tell because you read parts of the Bible and it's flat and it doesn't make any sense. You're either with me or against me, right? There's also all sorts of translation nonsense and Council of Nicaea and all this stuff. We have fragments of his teaching, and those fragments vibrate. When it's from him, it's juicy, right? Love thy neighbor as thyself, right? That's the ultimate teaching. If you deeply understand that, you don't need to understand anything else he said. But most people, and I include myself in this, I have mental understanding of it, but I don't have an embodied lived experience of loving thy neighbor as thyself. Mostly because what I've learned is that where we most struggle isn't actually with loving our neighbor, it's with loving ourselves. And you have to actually love yourself, meaning having that total connection with Godhead, with the understanding that not in a I am a God, but I am God just as you, all you watching this are a God, just as literally the monitor in front of you or the phone you're holding is actually God. It all is. It has to be. There can't be anything that is separate from God. And once you understand that on an ultra deep level and connect to that and feel that pure unconditioned love, accept it, feel it, are it, then you can project that outward to your neighbor. And if you can do that, then you're going to hit that level to where it'll be automatic to behave like Jesus. And that's what he was trying to teach us. He was trying to teach us how to be like him. Not to put him on a pedestal, think that we give 10% on the plate, and on our deathbed, after a life of wanton exploitation of our fellow human beings, we say, you know, I'm on Team Jesus now. And they go, well, that's all we needed to hear, dog. And smart move, by the way, smart move, waiting to the last second to do that, because you got to bang all those hookers and freaking, you know, kill that one guy in the island that one time that you didn't tell anybody about. So smart move, buddy, you know, like, waiting to the last second to do it. It's just such trash and nonsense. So next few years will be Clockwork Orange on the global scale. Oh, that's really funny, Alex. That's really like, yeah, I think a lot of, especially blue-haired Democrats, are gonna. I joke all the time about wanting to do that to a couple of people I deeply love who just don't see it. I want them just actually not even to witness any counter arguments by, like, you know, libertarians, Republicans, whatever, you know, but just to hear all the insane shit that the left says, right? Because they're good people that still buy into left stuff. I want to sit them down and force them to watch like libs of TikTok and all that kind of stuff, to just hear what their own people say. We can't let Trump get into office. He might have a special counselor to go after Biden. And I'm like, literally right now, and that's so fascist. I'm like, literally right now, Jack Smith or whatever his name is prosecuting Trump, trying to prevent him from becoming president. Like, do you understand how insane you are? Just like forcibly watch all of this for like, you know, a couple years straight. So that's hilarious. Almost done here. Real quick shout out to Dave G. Minor, if that's how you say it, or Maynor. Dave, thank you, brother. Like, you are always like giving these super stickers a couple bucks, you know, like the amount of work I put in this channel, I've probably cleared $100. I mostly use it as advertising for my other services and just as kind of a passion, something that I can creatively share with the world that hopefully is helpful to people. But these little donations, like, they add up. If everybody would throw in the $2, it would make a big difference. And Dave always does. So props to you, Dave. Thank you so much. And please ask a question once in a while so I can get back to you, Dave. I would love to do that. Thank you for discussing all this information. Much of it is way over my head, but not really. Well, thank you, Cece. I appreciate that. We're almost done here. I appreciate your insight. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. You always have good content. See you on here a lot. Appreciate you. Alex Manning, love thy neighbor as thyself. Hidden injunction there is the prerequisite to love oneself, otherwise impossible. Good night, Ian. Thank you, kind sir. Blessings to all, big and small. Blessings to all beings, big and small. I love that. That's a perfect place to end on. Much love, everyone. Thank you so much. If you're looking for some additional guidance, I do spiritual guidance for people, both intuitive and from the angels. And also, I will be teaching the angelic magic class in 2024. I'll be starting to advertise that soon, probably mid to late January. So I may even put up something about it tomorrow, because I'd like to give you about 6 weeks to sign up. And then if you want to know about what's going to happen for you within the macrocosm of what's happening here in Late Kali Yuga, natal chart if you're under 40, and Navamsa chart if you're over 40, you might be surprised how insanely useful that is. It's really the thing that I'm literally the best out of anything I do. And I've helped a lot of people with it. So if you feel called to do that, please sign up. I have, I think, 2 more that I can do in 2023. You could still sign up into 2024, but I'm pretty much booked out through 2023 at this point. I think I have 2 slots remaining in the 3rd week of December. So much love, everyone. Take care. Be well. And remember, please do, as Alex pointed out, love thy neighbor as thyself. And that starts by loving yourself within. And much love to you all. Many blessings. All right. Bye-bye, and see you next time.